Services. And this is our 3rd annual Aging Summit. So if you could share my slide, thank you. So we're really excited to bring this to you today. This event is sponsored by Samaritan Health Services. It is co-hosted with Western Oregon University. We have had quite a few hurdles to get to you today, but we're very excited to be here. Our intent with this event has always been to provide education, community education to people who may need this information or are interested in this information. And it began as a project, as an event specific for the Corvallis community. We basically had 100 seats available in a local church, and people came in person. Some of you may have attended in the past. This year, with our COVID-19 context and other things, we've had to move it to a virtual webinar. So in advance, I just want to say that we're doing the best we can. So hang with us, I guess, and we'll go ahead and get started. So just a little bit about me. I am also the gerontology department head at Western Oregon University. You're going to be joined by other professionals in the field who have a lot of information to share with us today. I want to also acknowledge my silent co-host, Nathan Sauer. He is through Western Oregon University in the University Computing Solutions Department. He's an equipment systems specialist, and he's going to help me today in making sure that this works as well as we can make it. I am currently broadcasting from my kitchen, and I'm assuming that you're sitting back and have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee and you're ready to join us. So let me show you our agenda for today. So go ahead with the next slide. There we go. So I'm currently obviously doing the welcome, and then we have 4 major speakers. We have Tera Stegner, Dr. Adam Brady, Dr. Meghan Marty, and Dr. Mari Goldner, who are going to be speaking on different topics. And then we also have an expert panel that'll be joining us at the end of the day. So I'm excited about this agenda. Some things that I want to kind of give you a sense of this is that every speaker in the middle of our program, Dr. Adam Brady, Meghan Marty, and Mari Goldner are going to present for 30 minutes, and then they're going to have a 15-minute question and answer period. So let me go ahead and go to the next slide so I can talk about some of these things. So if you've not done a Zoom meeting before, or a Zoom webinar, as a participant, you're not able to speak verbally, and we don't see you. So we know you're out there, but we can't actually see your faces. Your way to communicate with us, there are 2 functions that are available to you at the bottom of your screen. There is a chat function, which you can click on with your mouse, and that is an informal way for you just to make comments. Whatever you want to say can occur there. The Q&A, which is at the bottom, also to the left of the chat icon at the bottom of your screen, if you hover with your mouse, that is for formal questions. So that's your opportunity to type in a question to us at the end of our presentations. So our first speaker who will have a Q&A session will be Dr. Brady. He'll be speaking for 30 minutes, and then we have a 15-minute period where you're going to be able to write in your questions, and we will have 2 different people during our event who will then be presenting those questions verbally to our presenters. So we are very excited that you'll have a chance to ask a lot of questions. If you have any technical difficulties, if for some reason you get off of this webinar and you need to get back on and for some reason you're not able to, we do have a phone number here. I would encourage you to write this down right now, just in case for whatever reason you're not able to access the slide. So for instance, if you get kicked out of the webinar, you need to get back on. So go ahead and write down this number, and there'll be someone available to talk to you should you need it. And we hope you don't. And here are just some of the fun things about this event. We want you to learn and integrate. So take in what you want and what you find will be useful to you. Share it widely with family and friends. And like I said, we are recording this, so there will be, in the future, this will be part of the Grace Center's part of their resources. Take breaks and move your body. This is something that we do when we're in person. We usually have a little bit of laughter yoga and we move around a bit. So, get up, move around, grab something to eat. Feel free to please take some breaks as we move forward this morning. And we really hope that you enjoy your time with us today. So I think that's all that I need to say, other than thank you again to Samaritan Health Services for sponsoring our event, and for Western Oregon University for co-hosting. And we're going to go ahead and I'm going to pass this on to Tera Stegner. Tera Stegner is the Director of Community Relations at the Grace Center and Center for Adult Day Services. And she completed her Bachelor of Sciences in Human Development and Family Sciences with an emphasis in gerontology at Oregon State University. She also has an Oregon State University certificate in gerontology. And she is going to be speaking to you a little bit about the Grace Center. So go ahead, Tera, if you want to go ahead and share your screen.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Margaret, for the introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so I can share some slides with you all. So one moment here. Okay, Margaret, does that look right?
It looks great.
Okay, wonderful. So thank you again for the introduction. Like Margaret said, I'm one of the 2 co-directors of Grace Center for Adult Day Services. I focus on community relations, and one of the many things I get to do is do things like this and share with people about the Grace Center, which I absolutely love doing. Grace Center is the nonprofit that's bringing this event to you. Margaret, as well as many people that you're going to hear from, are board members on our board of directors. And I have to say a huge thank you to Margaret and her team that have made this event happen for the last 3 years. It's become a staple of Grace Center's events. And Grace Center does many events throughout the year. And we've really put a focus on doing events that really bring benefit to the community. We want to be able to give something back. So this is just another event where we wanted to be able to bring knowledge and resources to the community. Hopefully a lot of you already know about the Grace Center, but we were able to advertise this. One of the silver linings, I suppose, of COVID-19 and forcing us to go to a webinar instead of an in-person event is that we got to make this available to anyone across the globe. So some viewers may not actually know much about the Grace Center. Maybe you're not from the area or haven't heard much about us. So this is going to be a chance for me to just give you a brief overview of what it is that Grace Center does, who we are, what our mission is. And also, for those of you that do know a lot about the center, I think this will still be very informative because, as you can imagine, this year has brought a lot of change for our program. So I'm just going to take about 20 minutes and go through some slides to tell you about the center, and then also mention a couple upcoming opportunities. Okay, so Grace Center, what we are is a specialized health and social adult day center located in Corvallis, Oregon. Adult day services is kind of a little bit newer to the long-term care spectrum. They first started popping up in the United States in the 70s. And particularly in Oregon, we're a little bit slower in our state of adopting this as a form of long-term care and making it available to everyone. If you go over to the East Coast, you'll actually find a lot more adult day centers just prevalent within the community. But adult day is very important, despite being maybe a small percent of what's available right now in the long-term care spectrum in Oregon. It's a very vital percent. And I hope personally to see more adult day centers popping up around our communities. So it is what it sounds like. It is day services. So the first thing that's always important to clarify with Grace Center and adult day centers in general is that we are just open during the day, and none of our participants, which is the term we use for our clients, live at the Grace Center. It is just a day center. There are different types of adult day centers. Grace Center happens to be one of the leading adult day centers in Oregon, in that we are both a health and social adult day center, and we also have some specialties, and I'll get into that in a little bit. We do remain the only certified adult day center in Lynn, Benton, and Polk counties, as well as the east portion of Lincoln County. So we truly are a unique and needed service for a large area, at least a tri-county community. So a lot of people don't realize the extent of our services. We are located in Corvallis, but we are serving a wide area, and we have clients coming from as far as LC or Dallas and other outlying communities because we happen to remain the only certified adult day center in that area. Grace Center did start in 1983. So we've actually been serving this community for 37 years. We are, like I mentioned, a nonprofit. The reason our name is Grace Center is we have, our origin story is that a group of church members at Grace Lutheran Church here in Corvallis gathered together in the early 80s and wanted to come up with an idea of how to better serve the community, and after surveying some people and learning what the needs were, decided to pioneer adult day in our community, which was really forward thinking because, again, adult day services really hadn't cropped up in the United States until the 70s. So they were really pioneers in starting the Grace Center, and we've always been an independent nonprofit, but in honor of the church members that helped start the center, the name is the Grace Center. So 37 years later, we've grown extensively, and I'll get to share with you all that we're offering. So our mission as a nonprofit organization is to provide day services that optimize the cognitive and physical abilities of seniors and adults with disabilities so that they can remain as independent as possible and in their homes. So we accomplish our mission in a couple ways. It states there that we're optimizing cognitive and physical abilities. Now, of course, as we age and reach older adulthood, some decline is inevitable. However, there's a lot of physical or cognitive decline that can occur in either older age or as you have someone who is facing a disability that is avoidable, that is unnecessary decline. And that can come about because the individual, due to some type of disability or maybe a diagnosis of something like dementia, their ability to access things like fitness centers or social clubs or being able to just get out of the house, there can be some barriers. And when individuals are not able to stay cognitively engaged, socially engaged, moving their bodies and being physically engaged in the world, decline can increase. And it's very unfortunate because if that person just had some access to those services, if the barriers that were keeping them from those services were removed, they would be avoiding a lot of that decline. So at our center, we offer a variety of programming that really focuses on that, really helping people have every chance at success of avoiding unnecessary declines. We also are serving not just seniors. That's something that people often think, but we actually serve all ages 18 and up. So it's both seniors and adults with disabilities. Another way that we are keeping people in their own homes, and I should clarify that those declines that I spoke of, those unnecessary or avoidable declines, those can then jeopardize that person's ability to keep living in their home setting. If they've lost their ability to physically navigate their home safely, if they've got point where they need more assistance than is available to them in their home, then they may have to be moving into a skilled 24/7 facility. And of course, if the time is right, that is a great service, and I'm very thankful for the skilled facilities in our community. But if that individual with just a little bit of support could avoid that placement, I think we can all agree that that's a good thing, especially if that's the person's wishes. Most people, when you ask them, would much rather stay in their own home than have to move into a nursing home or memory care center. Additionally, due to the expense of those, if they can stay in their own homes, it's actually more sustainable financially for them or for the state if they are receiving state funding. So Grace Center and Adult Day Services in general are just helping create kind of that safety net and network around the person to help fulfill their wishes and also help our community provide affordable and sustainable long-term care to everyone. But the other way that we are keeping people in their own homes is not just by providing services to the client themselves who's attending the center, the participant, but we're also providing what we call respite to family caregivers. So the vast majority of our participants live at home, but do have a level of need that necessitates someone in their life to step up to the plate and be their care partner. And that often is going to be a spouse, a partner, adult child caring for a parent, but it could really be anyone. It could even be a neighbor or a friend. But that's really the one common denominator amongst our very diverse clients, is that for whatever reason, be it a cognitive impairment or physical or both, they can't be home alone safely anymore. That's really when adult day services becomes necessary and important. And so, of course, if you can't be home alone safely, then someone in your community, in your family, has been able to step into that role for you and is helping you with that. But that role as a caregiver can become a 24/7 unpaid job, and it is a labor of love. The people that are caring for their loved one are happy to do it, but it is still labor nonetheless. And everyone has their own needs and their own limits. And so sometimes family caregivers are experiencing caregiver burnout, not because they don't enjoy even their role as a caregiver, but they can only do so much. And sometimes someone's care needs, like I mentioned, make it to be like a 24/7 unpaid job. So those caregivers need our support. I'm guessing a lot of you listening have either been a caregiver, are a caregiver, or know someone who's a family caregiver. So I think we can all relate to this concept and just how amazing family caregivers are. I think they're the unsung heroes of our community, and I think we need to support them as much as we can. So with them being able to have their loved one at the center, it gives them time off. They don't have to worry about the safety of their loved one. All their loved one's needs are being met. They know their loved one's not only being taken care of, but benefiting and enjoying their time. And it gives them that space to do what they need to do. And caregivers are often needing a nap, time to go to the grocery store, maybe go to their work. Maybe they're still working full time. So family caregivers are just using that respite to recharge, take care of themselves, and then be able to continue that caregiving role longer. Because again, caregiver burnout can lead to premature facility placement for people. And if that caregiver could just get a little bit of respite, then they could sustain that for much longer, which is often their desire as well as their care receiver's desire. So our specialties, we specialize in memory care and post-rehabilitation. So with memory care, that means we're working with individuals with all different types of dementia and all different levels. Of course, that includes the most common form of dementia, which is Alzheimer's disease, but there are many other types of dementia. And we, like I mentioned, care for all different levels. So there are some individuals coming to our center who you wouldn't even guess that they have dementia. It's very hard to notice, and others where it's quite pronounced. That really speaks to Grace Center's diversity. We truly have a very diverse program because our other specialty is post-rehabilitation. That's going to be serving individuals who are recovering from a stroke, maybe a traumatic brain injury, maybe even just a major surgery like a hip replacement. And then there's a few people that come that don't quite fall into either specialty. They're just facing normal aging, age-related impairments that they're experiencing, or perhaps mental health is a primary diagnosis, or something neurological like Parkinson's. But as you can tell, just from our two specialties, that's serving a large group of people, a wide variety of people. We have individuals of all ages, like I mentioned, 18 and up. And people often ask, well, why would someone who's in their 20s need to come to Grace Center? Well, traumatic brain injuries can happen at any age, and strokes can actually happen quite young. So that might be a reason why someone younger is actually needing our services. So what's so beautiful about Grace Center is we have people from all different walks of life with all different capabilities. We have all the diversity of age and background and social economic status and ethnicity and abilities. And what's really cool is the one thing that unites all of us at Grace Center is we're there to be our best version of ourselves and to grow and to be in community. And so that's probably why myself and a lot of our team just love our job, because it's such a joyful place and it's really cool to be in such a diverse group of people. So that's who we're serving. And in those specialties, with memory care, we are training our staff extensively on memory care practices. We have secured exits, we have sensory therapy and activities designed for individuals with memory care needs, even certified things like Memories in the Making watercolor classes through the Alzheimer's Association. And then in our post-rehab specialty, we have special devices like ambulators that help wheelchair-bound individuals get up and walk. We have partnerships with local physical, occupational, and speech therapists and can provide one-on-one exercise times with our clients to help them continue in therapies they've already been assigned from their clinicians. And so our specialties, we take great pride in them, and it helps us really serve a lot of people and help people, again, be the best version of themselves they can be. So normally, Grace Center is available Mondays through Fridays from 7:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. and participants can attend full days, half days, or hourly, and on set schedules or as needed. The one requirement is they come once a month unless special circumstances don't allow for that. So it's really flexible. It's all about meeting the need of the client and their family caregiver. Some clients do come just 1 hour a couple times a month, and some come all 10 hours every day we're open. We have several contracts. One is with Medicaid, another is with the VA. We also have a few different programs we partner with through our local Senior and Disability Services office. And all of those create funding sources for a lot of people. And so quite a few of our clients actually attend our center at no cost to themselves. So we are passionate about making sure that people access our services no matter their income level. And so thankfully those contracts help diversify our program and make sure that there are no barriers for clients coming to our center. One thing that I like to describe Grace Center as that is helpful to get people the concept of what we do is we're kind of like that missing stepping stone in a person's journey. So we all usually start out living independently in our own homes and with our families, but sometimes some of our journeys end in a skilled facility needing 24/7 care. Leaving independence and living in your own home and going to full-time skilled care, that's a big change. That's a big jump. And what Grace Center is we're kind of the missing stepping stone that comes in and helps bridge that gap and makes that transition easier, delays it or just makes it easier. So that's really the heart of Grace Center. Some other things to make note of is we're very cost effective. If someone can't afford our private pay rates, they're still going to be about half as much as the closest compared service, which would be in home care. And again, it's at no cost to individuals who need that financial assistance, either through those contracts or we have grant writing, and donations actually make a big difference in how we're able to offer scholarships and things like that. However, I just described what we do at the center. I should mention too that, our program in of itself is a mix between exercise and activities, and we have a large building full of all different kinds of activity spaces. We serve a lunch, etc. But recently we've had to get creative. So as you can imagine, COVID-19 has affected us just like everyone else. And as of mid-March, all adult day centers in Oregon were required by the state to temporarily close as a precautionary measure. No COVID cases had occurred in adult day. And we remained closed up until recently. During that time, we created over 70 YouTube videos that created opportunities for our clients to do exercise and activities from their home and see our staff. And those are still available now on YouTube that all of you can access. Our nurse, as you see in the photo, was making twice weekly phone calls, checking in on all of our clients, and the state graciously gave us a stipend, all adult day centers, to keep us going and keep our team employed. We use that time to stay busy around the center. We got lots of projects done. You can see several of the Grace Center staff working hard. We cleaned, we painted, we updated our garden, we caught up on some administrative projects. So we've certainly been using the time as best we can and supporting the clients as best we could. Now, as of September 1st, the state has approved adult day services to offer alternative services. So we've not fully reopened yet, but we are offering some telehealth, live exercise activities in the morning, and social and engaging cognitive activities in the afternoon. We've delivered activity kits to our clients, so they have the items for the activities that they can zoom in for on a daily basis during the week. And then we're allowed to have 2 clients at the center at a time with one-on-one staffing ratios separated in the building with no crossover. So that's what we've been allowed to do at this time, and so we're doing that as best we can and carrying forward. One of the things that we've been busy getting ready for with the building is our virtual open house celebration. So normally tomorrow, National Grandparents' Day, the day after our annual aging summit, we have an open house celebration at our center. That obviously could not happen due to COVID-19. We had 250 community members, a team of 50 volunteers. Obviously that wouldn't be safe right now. So we made a virtual open house. So it's debuting tomorrow at 1 p.m. on Grace Center's website. I really hope you all take a chance to watch it. It's going to take what I've just explained and then expand on how we've then changed our center in hopes to be able to reopen. So I'll give you a little teaser. We did transform the inside of the building, and we've made 3 miniature Grace Centers. So to learn more about why we did that, how we did that, and what our vision is for that, you'll definitely want to tune in tomorrow. It is available at 1 p.m., but it's ongoing. So if you aren't available right at 1, it'll be on our website homepage from now on, starting at 1 p.m. tomorrow. So you'll definitely want to take advantage of that. There's the information, and actually I was going to mention this, but in the chat box, so if you go down to the bottom of your screen, you'll see chat like Margaret explained. At the very beginning of the chat, you might have to scroll up to the top of it. I've posted all the information, our website, our phone number for tech support or general questions, our YouTube channel if you want to check out those videos, and of course, again, like I said, our website, because that's where the open house will debut. All right, in my last minute, I have a quick, exciting announcement. So Grace Center provided this event to you at no cost, and that is definitely what we're doing here. However, if you are enjoying the content and you would like to make a donation, we wanted to give you an opportunity to do that. And the exciting announcement is we actually have 4 anonymous donors who are going to each match up to $1,000 today, which is amazing, which means if you give $1, it automatically becomes $5. If you give $10, it automatically becomes $50. And 100% of your donation goes straight to Grace Center. All of our panelists have volunteered their time, and Samaritan Health Services has sponsored the event. So this money goes directly into Grace Center's mission and helps us be ready to hopefully fully reopen and continue to sustain the way we're serving our clients as we are. So to do that, go to the chat box. There's a link. You click it. It brings the donation portal up. You can make a donation. It'll take a minute. You click in honor of and type 2020 Aging Summit. That way we know for sure that your donation was through the Aging Summit and counts towards that match. And we're just going to tally up what we get at the end of the day today, and we'll see if we make our match. So our goal is $1,000. And again, all of that's in the chat box. I'll try to repost it so it's right there where you can see it. And I'll give updates along the way, maybe through our moderators, of how we're doing towards our goal. We already have $240 as of 8:45 today. So again, last but not least, thank you to our sponsor and our co-host. And thanks all for tuning in.
So thank you, Tera. I appreciate the information. I am glad that we have a good sense of the Grace Center and that everyone can understand it. The services that the Grace Center provides to families, I'm a family gerontologist, and it is so critical that we have opportunities not only for individuals to have enrichment activities and care on a daily basis, but also for their family members to know that they're in a very safe and enriching environment. And I would never have decided to be on the board if I didn't really believe in these services. So thank you for that information. We're going to have a little bit of a switch in our agenda. We've got one speaker that we're going to switch out because of technical difficulties, and he'll be on for the next session. So we're going to go ahead and switch Dr. Meghan Marty's presentation with Dr. Adam Brady's presentation. So let me go ahead and introduce Dr. Meghan Marty. I see that you're already up there and that you'll be sharing your slides, but let me go ahead and introduce you while you go ahead and get ready, okay? So she's talking about living with worry and uncertainty. And we came up with this theme for this webinar, our summit this year, called Adapting to Changing Times, before we had fires, before we had the COVID-19 in such so long and so present in our lives. And we felt like, well, now in retrospect, it is very apt, I think, a very apt theme for our day today. Dr. Meghan Marty is a licensed clinical psychologist and founder of the Rose City Geropsychology in Portland, Oregon, where she provides psychotherapeutic services for older adults and their families. Dr. Marty also supports emotional well-being in later life by hosting healthy aging groups and book discussions at her practice, as well as offering educational presentations. The title of her talk is Living with Worry and Uncertainty. She'll be talking again for 30 minutes, and then you'll have a 15-minute time to ask her questions. So we'll let you take it away, Dr. Marty.
Great, thank you so much. I will go ahead and see if I can share my slides here as I get started. Okay, so hopefully that first slide is up for you guys. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak for today. And I got to say, I'm feeling a little bit anxious right now. I was logging on to watch the first speaker and wasn't expecting to go first today, but I'm happy to jump in. So just as we're getting started for today, I just want to mention that all the information that I present today is just meant to be educational, not meant to substitute any professional advice you might get from your own providers. When I do talks like this in the community, I like to say I am a psychologist, but not necessarily your psychologist. So if you have any questions about the suggestions or advice or information we talk about today, might be something you want to check out with your own providers. And then my only disclosure for today is that I do own my own psychotherapy practice in Southeast Portland. So as was mentioned just a moment ago, the topic for today is very timely given everything that we are dealing with in Oregon right now. Like we said, I'm going to be talking about living with worry and uncertainty. So I'd like to start out by just talking about what is worry? What do we mean when we talk about worry? So one thing to note is that human beings have an amazing ability to think about future events. And thinking ahead actually means that we can anticipate obstacles and problems, and it gives us the opportunity to plan solutions. And when worry helps us to achieve our goals, thinking ahead can actually be pretty helpful. So for example, we've heard for many months now, hand washing and physical distancing are helpful things that we can do in order to prevent the spread of COVID. So if we're worried about getting sick, there are things that we can do to potentially prevent from getting sick or spreading the virus. However, worrying is a way of thinking ahead that often leaves us feeling anxious or apprehensive. And when we worry excessively, we often think about worst case scenarios and we feel like we won't be able to cope. So when I'm talking about worry, again, it's kind of on this continuum of thinking ahead can be very helpful, but worry tends to start to cross that line where it starts to not be as helpful for us. So what does worry feel like? So you're probably very familiar with the cognitive experiences or the thinking processes associated with worry. So things like difficulty concentrating. Some people experience worry as uncontrollable. It kind of seems to take a life on a life of its own. And very often it involves thinking the worst will happen. And I like to call that worst case scenario thinking. We might think of it as making a mountain out of a molehill. And certainly it's natural to have noticed worst case scenario thinking, both during COVID-19 and the wildfires that we're experiencing now. But worry isn't just in our heads. When it becomes excessive, we also feel worry and anxiety in our bodies and in our emotions. So for example, very often when we experience worry, we are also feeling very anxious or nervous or on edge, maybe somewhat irritable or impatient, and certainly feeling afraid or fearful. We feel it in our bodies as well, and that usually shows up as muscle tension or aches and pains, restlessness or just difficulty relaxing, certainly difficulty sleeping, and I know we have a whole talk on that later on today. And then feeling easily fatigued as well. So it's helpful to know that worry isn't just the thinking processes, but it has other effects on us as well. So what triggers worry and uncertainty? And really anything can be a trigger for worry. Even when everything is going right, you might manage to think to yourself, but what if it all falls apart, right? Lots of people talk about waiting for the other shoe to drop. But there's particular situations where worry becomes even more common. And these are listed on the slides here. So situations that are ambiguous, they're open to different interpretations, situations that are novel or new, where we don't necessarily have experience to fall back on, and situations that are unpredictable, and it's unclear how things will turn out. And certainly these sound familiar in the moment, both with the current worldwide health situation, as well as, again, the wildfires we are experiencing this week, so that lots of people are experiencing a lot of worry. Again, likely because the situations we're facing contain all of these factors. So while worry can be helpful or unhelpful, it can be useful to distinguish between two different types of worry. And again, these are listed on the slides here. So the first type of worry is real problem worries. And these are worries that are about actual problems that are affecting you right now. And they're worries where you can do something about the problem. There's a way to solve the problem, an action that you can take. So for example, if I don't have enough food in the house to last more than a few days, that lends itself to figuring out what I can do right now to take a step to solve that worry. However, the other type of worries are hypothetical worries, and these are about things that don't currently exist, but they might happen in the future. And there aren't any actions that can solve the potential problem right now. So one example of this might be, having the worry that all of my family might get sick and die from COVID. And again, that kind of is an example of perhaps the worst case scenario thinking, where there's not really anything I can necessarily do to solve that problem in this moment. There might be steps I could take to mitigate the risk, but not necessarily a way that I could solve that problem right now. So it's really helpful to notice these different types of worry, and again, that kind of helps us to figure out what to do about the different worries. Again, noting that even though worry can feel uncomfortable, again, it has a very adaptive purpose for us. So it's helpful to be able to distinguish these real problem worries from hypothetical worries. So when does worry become a problem? So again, everybody worries to some degree, and some thinking ahead can help us to plan and cope. There's no right amount of worry, and it kind of it's kind of dependent on who you are and your life experience. But worry can become a problem when it stops you from living the life that you want to live, or if it leaves you feeling demoralized or exhausted. That's kind of represented on this continuum here of normal worry that helps us to get what we want. It helps us to solve problems, all the way through excessive worry that just leaves us feeling upset or exhausted, and it really can get in the way of living the life that we want to lead. And again, all of us can be on different ends of the spectrum, or at any point in between, kind of depending on the situation and the number of things that we are dealing with at once. So the level of stress and coping with multiple stressors at once can make an impact on where you are in this continuum as well. So what can we do about worry? This is what we'll spend the bulk of our time talking about today. And I do want to just mention that there's no one size fits all on this. Not all of these suggestions may be helpful to you, but hopefully you come away from our talk today with a few new ideas, or perhaps some reminders of some old ideas. So again, we'll be talking about different strategies for coping with worry. Take whatever seems useful to you and leave the rest. So the first one is using your past experience. So none of us make it to later life without encountering stress. And one of the best things about being older is using our experience and the wisdom gained through that experience to help guide us through our current struggles. So for example, someone who is in their 70s or 80s or 90s might have already experienced the death of a spouse, maybe a move to a retirement community, or helping to raise grandchildren. And it can be really useful to think back to some of these times where you had to manage a great deal of stress and really look at what worked well for you then and which of these strategies might be helpful to you now. And very often when I'm working with folks in psychotherapy, this is one of the first things that we do, is look at what coping strategies and skills and abilities do they already have that could come in handy with what they're dealing with right now. So for example, in the case of losing a spouse, perhaps one has relied on spirituality or faith to help get through. Or maybe if someone has moved to a retirement community, making it a priority to stay in contact with longtime friends, even if they live in a new place. Helping to raise grandchildren could be an ongoing stressor. So perhaps starting to practice yoga or Tai Chi. If all of these strategies had been useful in the past, it might really be worth taking a look at which of those might be helpful now. And reflecting on past successes and coping with difficulties can also put our current situations into proper perspective. So, kind of this sense of I've dealt with really difficult things in the past, and I can make it through this one as well. It's also useful to look at what strategies did not work well for you in the past. So for example, I heard on the radio yesterday a report that alcohol use has increased a lot during these past 6 months that we've been dealing with COVID. That might be a strategy where perhaps if someone has struggled with alcohol in the past, that's not going to be helpful for them now as well. Even though it might feel good in the moment, it's not going to be useful in the long term. So again, looking at what are things that I tried to do in the past to cope that maybe didn't work so well for me. And just in general, coping strategies that are oriented toward active engagement with the problem are usually more effective in the long term versus strategies that are oriented toward avoidance or inaction. So for example, if I'm worried about a physical symptom that I'm having, calling my doctor to check it out and see if I need to come in is going to be a lot more helpful for me and managing my worry about the symptom in the long run versus just trying to ignore the symptom or hoping that it'll go away. Same thing for dealing with the wildfires. There's been lots of worry, very understandably this week, about needing to evacuate. But I could take steps like packing a go bag or making an evacuation plan or letting family members know where I am. That might be a way that is actively engaging in the situation that could help to mitigate my worry versus just putting Netflix on for 12 hours and pretending that none of this is happening. So again, you have lived through difficulties in the past. You have resilience, and think about what has been helpful for you before and what could be helpful for you now. The next thing is to identify the type of worry. And again, this goes back to what we were mentioning before about real world or real problem worries versus hypothetical worries. So it can be helpful just to start out with asking yourself specifically, what am I worried about? And here, the more specific you can be, the more helpful that is. So something kind of global, like, I'm worried about being able to take care of myself. That's not very specific. It's pretty broad. If you can narrow it down to, well, what I'm really worried about is running out of supplies at home. That's going to be a lot more useful in coping with the worry if you can pinpoint what exactly the thing is that you're worried about. Then the next step is to ask, is this a problem I can actually do something about? And that's what tells you, is this a real problem worry or this is a hypothetical worry? And for those real problem worries, we can start to work out our options and then do them. So for example, at the beginning of COVID, apparently there were lots of folks who were worried about running out of toilet paper, right? So if that's my specific worry, I could come up with a bunch of options about what to do about that. I could order from the grocery store. I could ask a family member to pick some up for me. I could ask to borrow some from a neighbor. I could think of something else to use, like Kleenex. So again, it helps us to start figuring out specific actions that we could take to help with this worry. And then you pick the best option and you do it, and then you let go of the worry and focus on something else more important. Now, if it's a hypothetical worry, that's where it's more helpful to let the worry go and focus on something else that's important to you right now. So for example, I've spoken with lots of folks who are worried about their adult children who are essential workers, worried about them getting sick from COVID. There's probably not something we can do right in the moment to help prevent that from happening. So that might be more of the hypothetical worry, where it's more important to focus on letting it go and focus on something else that's really important to us right now. The next thing is to notice and limit your triggers for worry. And so can be really useful to pay attention to when your worry is higher or lower. So monitoring the intensity of the worry from normal to excessive. Trying to notice that there's a specific time of day or day of the week where you're feeling more worried, or perhaps at a specific place, or when you're doing a specific activity, or perhaps around certain people who are experiencing more worry. So for example, watching the news is something that is very triggering for folks these days. And all of us need to find the right balance of staying informed about what's going on, but also managing excessive worry. So if I'm noticing that I'm getting really kind of anxious and nervous and worried when I'm watching the news, I don't have to stop watching the news altogether. I could just choose to limit the time that I spend on keeping up with the news. So that might be things like, I'm only going to check my social media feed once a day, or perhaps I'm going to read the news in a newspaper or online versus watching it on TV. Sometimes the videos can be kind of triggering for us. So it can be helpful to, again, just be thoughtful about how we're engaging in the things that tend to cause us worry. And then the next thing is to maintain balance. And this is kind of an overall kind of life management suggestion here, but it can be really helpful even during times of a lot of stress. To organize a daily routine that involves a balance of activities that give us a sense of achievement, help us to stay connected to others, as well as things that we do just that are fun and enjoyable to do. So for activities with regard to achievement, we feel good when we've achieved or accomplished something, and it can be helpful to make sure we build that into our activities every day, things that give us a sense of achievement. So it might be things like doing some housework or doing some gardening or making sure I do my PT exercises every day. With regard to closeness and connection, human beings are social animals, so we need and we naturally crave closeness and connection with other people. So it's really important to find creative ways to connect so that we don't become isolated. I've spoken with lots of folks who maybe were pretty intimidated by technology in the past, but over the last 6 months, they've been able to find online activities like book clubs or film clubs, certainly, watching lectures and presentations like we're doing right now, using social media or phone or video calls to stay in touch with family and friends. I've known some folks who have found opportunities for virtual volunteering as well. So those can all help us to feel closer to one another. And then finally, when we're struggling with anxiety and worry, we can lose touch with things that used to give us pleasure. So planning to do things each day that just make us feel joyful is really useful as well. So reading a good book, watching our favorite comedy, singing our favorite music, all of those things can help us to manage that level of worry we might be experiencing. And then finally, be where you are. And what I mean by this is, I mentioned at the beginning, when we're worrying, we're thinking about something that we fear might happen in the future. So even though our bodies are right here, right now, our minds are somewhere off into the future. And when that happens, we're not really living in or appreciating the present moment. And so it can be helpful to just press the pause button. And what that might look like is just taking a few slow, long, deep breaths. And it doesn't take it very long to do it, but it can really do wonders for immediately decreasing our level of worry or stress. Practicing gratitude is another way that can help to connect us with immediate moments of joy and aliveness and pleasure. So it might be something where at the end of each day, you take time to reflect on what you're thankful for today. And when you're practicing gratitude, it can be very helpful to try to be as specific as possible again and notice new things every day. So it'd be easy to say every day, oh, I'm grateful for my family. But it can be useful to think about, okay, I'm grateful that I got to drink my hot cup of coffee this morning, or I'm grateful that I got to text with my best friend last night, or I'm grateful that I have a chocolate cookie waiting for me for dessert tonight. Those little things can help to kind of just reorient and kind of refocus our attention on the positives that still very much exist, even when we are dealing with a lot of stress and worry. Another one is practicing mindfulness. And for both formal mindfulness and informal mindfulness. So when I talk about mindfulness, I'm usually talking about the opposite of being on autopilot. So I don't know if you've had this experience, but I certainly have, where I'm maybe taking a shower and my mind is off on a million different things, and I can't remember whether or not I shampooed my hair yet. That might be an example of when I was on autopilot. But practicing mindfulness helps us to let go of our worries and bring ourselves back to the present moment. And formal mindfulness practice might be something where you actually sit down for 10 or 15 minutes and focus on the gentle movement of the breath or sounds that you hear around you. Whereas informal practice are just doing our normal activities, but doing them with intention and awareness. So it could be things like washing the dishes, brushing our teeth, drinking our favorite tea. but doing those activities and really focusing on the activities while we're doing them. In order to, again, just kind of shift the focus of our attention. And then finally, recognize that it is normal to experience worry, especially during a global pandemic when we are all living with uncertainty. And it's really important to be gentle and treat yourself like you would your best friend, a baby kitten, a priceless work of art. You know, holding yourself with kindness and compassion, knowing that this is a difficult time and it is normal if you feel like you're struggling at times. And then finally, when to get help. So what happens if you've tried managing worry on your own and you're still kind of struggling? So I've listed a couple of things in the slide here that it may be helpful to get some professional help if you're struggling with these things. So if you're feeling very worried or upset or irritated and it is just persistent, it's not going away, there's not ups and downs, it's just you feel stressed and worried all the time. Or if you're feeling down or low or just not interested in anything, and again, this is persistent. All of us have these moments from time to time, but if this is lasting for you and you're just not able to shake it, certainly if you're having difficult feelings and make it hard to spend time with other people or get things done, and difficult feelings that don't get better in spite of your best efforts to cope. This is when it might be helpful to speak with a mental health clinician, a psychologist, a clinical social worker, a counselor, a psychiatrist could help you to build additional coping strategies for worry if you're not able to be able to manage on your own. Okay, so that was the final slide that I had for the presentation today. I think we have a couple of minutes left in the presentation. So is that correct, Margaret?
Yes, actually, can you hear me okay?
I can, yep, perfect.
Okay,
yeah.
so you are, if you want to go ahead, you can take your slides off. And
can I do one more thing before we finish? Actually,
I was just
because we have a couple of minutes. Yeah.
I was going to say we have 15 minutes.
Okay.
So I was just going to say you have more than enough time. So
okay, perfect. So before we do the question and answer, I actually wanted to invite everyone to do a couple of minutes of just relaxation breathing, just to end out the presentation today.
Yes,
so
thank you.
So if you're willing, I'll just lead us through a short relaxation exercise. No pressure to do it if you don't want to, but I'd invite you to just get seated comfortably in your chair. And we'll just do this relaxation exercise together for the next few moments. So get seated comfortably. You might want to put your feet flat on the ground. You want to sit in an upright in a relaxed but alert position. I always like to check at what my shoulders are doing. If you'd like, you can choose to gently close your eyes. That helps to minimize distraction. Or if you want to keep your eyes open, you can just fix your gaze on a stationary spot in the room. And then I invite you to just begin by gently focusing your attention on your breath. Not necessarily trying to change anything, but just really noticing the physical sensations of breathing in and breathing out. Just noticing where you feel the breath the most. You might notice the cool air as it's entering your nose and filling your lungs and belly. And then the warm air as you let it release. You might choose to lengthen and to deepen the breath very gently, not trying to force anything, but just seeing if you can slow down the breath. And if you notice that your mind is beginning to wander, just observe that that has happened. You might thank your mind for the thought, and then shift your attention back to the breath. And this is just a reminder, with whatever we might be worried about, we can always choose to press the pause button. Take a few slow, deep breaths, and then proceed on our way. So I would invite you, if your eyes are closed, you can gently open them and return your attention to the room. Thank you so much, everyone, for having me, and I will stop sharing my slides now so we can move into the Q&A section. Okay.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you very
Thank you,
much,
Dr.
Dr. Marty. I appreciate it. So I wanted to just make sure that everybody understands what we're doing. So we have Dr. Marty for another 15 minutes. And there's a Q&A section at the bottom of your slide, of the screen. You can type in a question to her. I'm going to introduce Jackie Thorsness, who's a wonderful member of our board, and she has been reviewing the questions, and she'll be posing them to you, Dr. Marty, so that you don't have to worry about tracking those.
Read through them all, yeah.
Answering everyone. So, Jackie, do you have any questions there that you want to bring forward?
Yes, we have one question for Dr. Marty. Can worry be a positive thing in any way? And is there a good time to worry? Or is that called something else?
I would definitely say that worry can be a positive. Again, if it's more on that end of the real problem worries, where there's some action that we can take as a result of the worry, that actually is very adaptive and very helpful for us. And so again, those types of worries where there's kind of different solutions that we can come up with, that is absolutely positive and helpful for us. Remind me of the second part of that question. I just lost it.
They just asked, or is that called something else?
Okay.
If it was a good worry.
Yeah. And again, that it kind of depends on each individual and our background and our experiences. Some of us are just going to naturally be a little bit more worried and a little bit more anxious than others. And that, again, that's definitely not necessarily a bad thing either. It really depends on how the worry is working for us. If it's adaptive, if it helps us to take action and move forward, or if it's something that kind of ends up being excessive to the point where it's keeping us stuck, then it's not so useful. Yeah. So I definitely don't want to get rid of worry altogether. Sometimes when I start working with people in therapy and they're very worried and having a lot of anxiety, they just want to get rid of the worry and get rid of the anxiety. And we actually don't want that. It's really adaptive to have some amount of worry some of the time.
Great, thank you. So we have several more questions. The next one is, I'm interested in the idea of scheduling time to worry rather than indulging in it randomly. You address that with hitting the pause button. Is there a more explicit way to set aside time for worries, such as listening to the news, and then actively committing to doing things other than worrying?
Yeah, so that is actually a technique that is sometimes taught in cognitive behavioral therapy, is actually scheduling worry time. And I won't go into all the details of it right here, but that is the idea that we can actually set aside a specific amount of time every day to really sit and just think and focus on our worries and perhaps write them out. It's a little bit more involved than that, but that is very helpful for some folks, because part of that is that the rest of the day you can tell yourself, I don't need to worry about that right now. I've got my worry time scheduled later on today. So I don't need to worry about that right now. I'm going to put that aside and I'm going to focus on something else for now. So I should have mentioned also that some of the information that I included in the presentation today comes from a pamphlet that is actually available, publicly available online through a website called psychologytools.com. And if anyone wants this information, I'm happy to email it to them. They created a guide to living with worry and anxiety amidst global uncertainty. That's a free guide that's available to anyone who's interested, and that actually does describe the worry time and how to do that if that's something that you're interested in trying. But even on a moment-to-moment basis, it's helpful, again, to build those mindfulness muscles so we can be aware of what our minds are doing at any given moment, and then be intentional about, okay, is thinking about this right now helpful for me? And if not, then what can I do to shift my attention?
Great, thank you. We have a couple more questions that are along the same lines about helping others who are worried. One that's a little more specific: how can I ease the hypothetical worries of others? For example, my grandmother is very anxious about COVID-19 and I'm unsure how to help.
Yeah, it's really hard to see loved ones suffering like that. I think the first thing is to recognize that when people are worrying excessively, they're not doing it on purpose. That usually there is, again, if it's really on that extreme end of worry, that sometimes, well, a lot of times it is not voluntary or under their control. So know that they're not doing it on purpose. It's not a switch that someone can just turn off and all of a sudden they're not worried. It can also be really helpful, again, kind of depending on the situation and the person and your relationship with them, to sometimes just reflect that worry that you're hearing. So not necessarily get caught up in the content of what they're saying, but just really reflect the feeling back to them. So saying something like, gosh, you sound really worried right now, or gosh, you sound really anxious right now, or gosh, you sound really distressed right now. That can sometimes that can help people step out of, again, like the content of their worry, which is easy to kind of get really focused on, and really take a step back and say, okay, and this is for ourselves, but also for people that in our lives that might be struggling with worry. Okay, I'm having a lot of worry right now. What would be most helpful for me? But again, I just really want to empathize is that it is really hard to know how to best support people who are managing a lot of worry. If it's to the point where it doesn't feel like you or another family member or friend can help enough, that might be a time to try to seek some professional support. A good way to do that is to just start with a primary care provider. A lot of times primary care providers will have referrals for behavioral health clinicians in their clinics, or other therapists in the community that might be helpful. So again, if it feels like the people around the person aren't able to help enough, that might be a time to seek professional support.
Very good, thank you. We have a question asking if you could talk a little more about reframing.
Yeah, so I don't know that I mentioned that very specifically in the talk, but reframing is another tool that we very often teach in cognitive behavioral therapy, where it's basically learning how to look at a situation more flexibly. So are there different ways or different perspectives that we can look at the situation? So one example might be, I know for myself, during these past 6 months at during COVID, I've been spending a lot more time at home, which in one way I could think of as, gosh, this really stinks. I want to be out eating at restaurants, or I want to be out seeing my friends. I want to be out doing all these other things. And I can get really stuck on kind of the negative aspect of that. But what reframing might look like is, okay, well, I'm spending more time at home. that means I get to spend a little bit more time with my dog, who's been getting to go on a lot more walks lately than he would normally. Or, gosh, I can actually go through that closet I've been meaning to clean out for, 5 years. Or, well, maybe this is a good time to connect with my friends from far away who I normally wouldn't have time to call or talk to. So we're not changing anything objectively about the situation. I'm still stuck at home, but I'm just able to kind of look at it from different angles or different perspectives, and really be able to think about the situation more flexibly. And that's something that there's lots of tools online that can help you learn how to do that, but certainly something that a clinician who's trained in cognitive behavioral therapy would be able to help you do as well.
Thank you. We have a question asking, is concern worry?
Well, that's interesting. I would suggest that it probably is on that continuum of kind of normal worry to excessive worry. So to me, when I hear the word concern, I would say that probably is a form of worry or a type of worry, but maybe on the little less intense side. Yeah. But I think, yeah, I guess that's my short answer is yes, I think it probably is a type of worry. Yeah.
Great. Okay. And we have this question. How do we differentiate between a worry we can do something about and one we can't? From the common cultural perspective that we can do anything and solve any problem if we just keep trying hard enough and never give up.
Yeah, and I think in the presentation, I presented it as this dichotomy that something is either a real problem worry or a hypothetical worry. But in the real world, in real life, very often it is not clear, is this a real problem worry or a hypothetical worry? I guess one way to think about it is, again, those more kind of global or vague or abstract worries, we can't necessarily take action on right in the moment. So I would say those are the types of worries that, are more kind of, we have to learn to let go of them. That there really isn't, as much as we believe we can do anything, there just literally isn't anything that we can do, right? So, I'm looking out my window at the smoke in the air right now. There's literally nothing I can do about the smoke in the air. So that's not helpful for me to worry about the smoke in the air. I can take, steps to protect myself and to protect my family, but I can't do anything about the problem of the smoke in the air. So, I know that a lot of people do have kind of this cultural perspective of we can do anything. And, I think it goes back to the Serenity Prayer that they've been using in AA for decades and decades now, knowing what we have control over, knowing what we don't have control over, and knowing how to tell the difference.
Thank you. So I think we have time for one more question. And there's one here, you spoke a little bit to it in a more general sense, but this is a little more specific, so I'll ask it. And this relates to how to help others who are worrying. This specific question is, how can one deal effectively with a spouse who worries excessively other than ignoring them?
Well, yeah, well, I think it goes back to what I mentioned before is like, sometimes it can be helpful to acknowledge that they're worrying, right? So being able to say to my spouse, gosh, your level of worry seems pretty high right now. Is there something that we could do to help you feel more at ease? I think the idea of ignoring someone's worry really depends on the situation, if that is helpful or not. Sometimes for our own sake, we need to get a little bit of distance from the person who maybe is worrying excessively, but that can feel really invalidating to the person who is having the worry. So, again, I might do something, again, depending on the person and the situation, I might do something to acknowledge that they are worried, maybe try to help them problem solve if there are specific actions that they can take about the thing they're worried about. or help to engage them in something that would be a distraction to them, right? So if my spouse is really worried about something, we could try to problem solve together, or I could say, hey, let's find a movie to watch for a few hours, you know, watch our favorite movie. That would be just a distraction for a little while. But again, ignoring might be useful if we got to take care of ourselves in the moment, but that's not going to be helpful probably in the long run.
I want to thank you, Dr. Marty, for sharing all your insights with us. It's such an important topic and critical to all of us, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, and I also will just want to make a plug that you can access professional help this way, right? Through telehealth, right? And,
Absolutely.
and if people need to be aware of that, if they really feel like they need to reach out. So yeah.
Thank you for mentioning that. That was a huge change that happened right at the beginning of COVID, that Medicare used to have really strict guidelines around who could do telehealth, and those have been way, way relaxed. And so, yeah, I've been meeting with people exclusively online or by phone for the last 6 months, and it has been very, very helpful for people. So yeah, you definitely don't need to go anywhere to meet with a mental health professional right now. Yeah. Thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, and thank you for being with us this morning and being flexible by jumping in early. I appreciate it.
You're so welcome. Yeah, and if anyone has questions or you know, anything that I could be helpful with, I think I put my email on the last slide. I'm happy to send slides out if they haven't been given out yet, and I'm happy to be a resource for the community.
Great, thank you very much.
You're
All
welcome.
right, we'll see you later.
Okay.
Okay, everybody, I want you to stand up, stretch your arms, and I'm going to bring in our next speaker while you're moving a bit or have a cup of tea. So we're excited to have Dr. Adam Brady join us. Dr. Adam Brady is going to be speaking on navigating the COVID-19 pandemic. He is an infectious disease physician working at Samaritan Health Services, which is our sponsor of our Aging Summit today. His current role is chair of the SHS, Samaritan Health Services Coronavirus Task Force, which is leading and coordinating Samaritan's response to the virus across Samaritan hospitals and clinics in Lynn, Benton, and Lincoln counties. And I'm going to go ahead and invite Dr. Adam Brady to go ahead and share his screen with us and unmute himself. And there he is. And we will let him get a second or two to get started. I hope you're enjoying our webinar and learning from it. So Dr. Brady, whenever you're ready, feel free to carry on.
Great, thanks Margaret, and thanks for the invitation from Margaret, Anita, and everyone else at the Grace Center team. And big thank you to Dr. Marty for going first. Also, my computer decided to overhaul its entire operating system this morning, so we're back now. But thanks, Dr. Marty, for filling in. So what I want to talk about today is, the title of the talk is Navigating the COVID-19 Pandemic. And so really what we'll focus on today is starting with a few basics of COVID-19 and basically what is COVID-19. Just sort of a snapshot of recent, how things are going with cases in the United States and cases here in Oregon. We'll talk a little bit about the risk and the risk of severe illness with COVID-19, and then what we can do to stay safe and reduce our risk from potentially acquiring COVID-19. We'll talk about the ins and outs of mask use and how those can be helpful, and then spend some time discussing the risk levels of certain activities, what is safe, what might be a little more risky. And then also hopefully reassure you about medical care during the pandemic as well. So COVID-19 cases were first reported at the end of last year as cases of pneumonia, and it started in China, and the medical community there and worldwide didn't really know what the cause was. Eventually it was determined that it was a virus, and it was identified as SARS-CoV-2, so Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome Coronavirus 2. So that's the official name of the virus, and then the virus causes an infection or a disease called coronavirus disease 2019, and that's where COVID comes from there in the bowl. So since then, we've had, even less than a year, we've had 28 million cases worldwide, including 28,000 cases and counting here in Oregon. So coronaviruses are not new. There are a large family of viruses that can cause illness in both people and in animals. Now, typically, we see coronaviruses every year that are seasonal, or what we call seasonal coronaviruses. And they cause cold-like illnesses in children and adults alike, but don't really tend to be too severe unless you have severe deficiencies in your immune system. Rarely what can happen is certain animal strains of coronavirus can cross over and infect people. Now, this has happened a couple of times in the recent past. First was in 2003, where the SARS epidemic in Asia was just called SARS-CoV, now maybe CoV-1. MERS coronavirus was in the Arabian Peninsula in the Middle East in 2012, and now we have SARS-CoV-2, where we have high numbers of cases worldwide. And so what can happen, and this is not SARS-CoV-2, the current virus, but it was thought that in 2003, bats can serve as reservoirs for coronaviruses, and then through an intermediary, which was thought to be civet cats, can then pass on through humans. So this current pandemic has caused a whole lot more cases than SARS and MERS combined. So this is a graph of what's happened really worldwide and highlighted by the United States here since the beginning of the pandemic. Now, what this graph shows is on the bottom, days since the country's first case. So when you had your first case, you show up here at time 0. And on this axis here showing how many new cases per day adjusted by population, so by every 1 million people. So the pandemic started here in in the United States in early 2020, and then our first sort of quote unquote surge was in the spring, in March and April. Then we had this sort of plateau phase, and we were hopeful that things would continue to go down, but with reopening of society and other factors, we've seen cases go up quite a bit. So we'll look at how this looks in Oregon, which really mirrors this curve as well. Thankfully, over the past few weeks and months, we've seen a steady decline in cases, and we're hoping that that will continue instead of do something similar than it did back here in the spring. This is an interesting graph also because you can see what's happening worldwide as well. Again, it's a little bit busy and harder to see, but up here now, and you don't want to be in the top right of this graph. That means you have the most amount of cases in your country per population. And you can see lots of South American countries, Argentina, Peru, Colombia, Brazil. But also, interestingly, we see cases increasing in the United Kingdom here recently. The European Union, especially Spain, has increased past where its peak was even higher back in the spring. So things to keep an eye on. So in the United States, we've had 6,400,000 cases and 192,000 deaths. Worldwide, as I mentioned, 28 million cases and 911,000 deaths. So unfortunately, the United States has had a disproportionately high number of deaths, nearly over 20% of the world's deaths, and also cases, 6 million out of 28 million in total as well. So in Oregon, this is a graph that moves, and you can see this is really the beginning of March, and we have April, May, June. And so as we saw in that first graph, cases rose sharply in April and then really plateaued in May and June. And then beginning of June through July and August, we really peaked. And now ever since that time, from August 1st, seeing that peak has decreased. And so that is reassuring, and we continue to have decreased numbers of cases. Again, we have 28,865 cases and 499 deaths as of last night. So how does COVID-19 spread? So it's been shown to spread very easily from person to person, and mostly through respiratory droplets, and especially those between people who are close together and indoors, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. So droplets are created when sneezing, coughing, talking to some degree as well. And some of these can hang in the air, and especially people that are nearby can be affected and breathe them in and cause infection as well. Other viruses, it's possible to spread the virus or acquire the virus after touching objects and then touching your mouth or your face. It seems like this could happen with COVID-19, but it's less likely, and it doesn't happen as much as some other viruses that we've seen. So if you do acquire COVID-19, symptoms can be varied. Fevers, chills, cough, shortness of breath, those are the 3 or 4 most common symptoms that we can see. There are a whole host of symptoms which makes diagnosis of COVID-19 difficult. Muscle aches and pains, headache, loss of taste or smell. You can have a sore throat. Mentioned shortness of breath, congestion or runny nose, even nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. And so you don't have to have all of these symptoms to have COVID-19. And the tricky part of this virus is that some people may not have any symptoms at all. In some studies looking at up to 40% of people who are diagnosed with COVID-19 didn't have any symptoms. That makes it very difficult when we're trying to get a virus under control. It's not like an infection where, if you're sick, you know it. You can be walking around and potentially exposing others without knowing about it. So COVID-19 testing has been in the news and something that we as a country have struggled with. There are 2 main types of tests that can be done. There are many different types of tests, but 2 main categories. So the first category is where you look for the virus in the nose, usually in the nose. Sometimes it can be saliva or the throat, but oftentimes it's a nasal swab. That looks for the genetic material of the virus. Or it can look for a piece of the virus. That's called an antigen test. So these tests tell you if you have an active infection and that you could be infectious. There are antibody tests, which is called serology, which looks for an antibody called IgG. Now, IgG is a protein that's made after you're exposed to an infection. It usually takes a couple of weeks to show up. So that doesn't tell you if you're infectious. What it might tell you is that you were infected in the past. Currently, though, it's unclear if you're positive, if that means you're immune to further infection. It is thought that you are, at least for a period of 2 or 3 months, but that is still being borne out. Again, this virus being really known to medicine and science for less than a year at this stage. So what is a major concern is severe illness with COVID-19, and severe illness being severe pneumonia that can lead to respiratory failure and intubation, potentially mechanical ventilation. Now, it seems that older adults are more susceptible to severe illness. So 8 out of every 10 COVID-related deaths in the United States have been adults 65 or over. People with underlying medical conditions such as heart or lung disease, high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity also seem to be more susceptible to severe illness with COVID-19. So this is an interesting chart from the CDC showing the rates of hospitalization and death from COVID-19 by a person's age. So they use an age group here of 18 to 29 years old to be the baseline or the comparison. So if you're younger than 18 to 29 years old, you have a lower risk of hospitalization and a lower risk of death than if you were in this age group of 18 to 29 years old. Now, the main thing as we go up in age by decade here, or mostly by decade, the risk of severe disease goes up. The risk of hospitalization can be up to 8 to 13 times higher, and the risk of death compared to regularly healthy 18 to 28-year-olds can be up to 630 times higher. Now, what's reassuring about this is that over time, the severity of this infection seems to be going down. Earlier in March, when we saw that initial peak, we were seeing lots more people on ventilators in the hospital, a lot more people with severe infection. Now we are seeing less, even though we're seeing more cases, we're not seeing the same amount of people being hospitalized with severe infection, which is good news. There's a couple of things likely contributing to that. One being that we know more about the virus and how to take care of it. We have some more therapeutics, which we'll mention later in the talk. And also, there may have been changes in how the virus spreads. There are some thoughts that the virus may have changed or mutated. And I try not to use mutated because that can stir up some worry, but changed to potentially be more infectious. So it spreads a little easier, but may not cause as severe illness. And so that has been reassuring. And I think now these numbers might be a little bit lower. So I mentioned that your risk of hospitalization goes up with certain medical conditions, and this is a graphic showing what can make you at higher risk for hospitalization from COVID-19. So Things like asthma can increase your risk by 1.5 times, high blood pressure by 3 times, obesity and diabetes, chronic kidney disease, severe obesity. If you have more than one condition that are listed here on the bottom, it can increase your risk of hospitalization by 4.5 times. If you have 3 or more of these underlying conditions, up to 5 times more likely to be hospitalized. So if you are hospitalized, we do have some treatments that are available, and lots have been in the news about these and other agents. So remdesivir is an intravenous antiviral agent that was given emergency use authorization by the FDA. It's not a silver bullet, but it's been shown to hasten recovery in some patients. So it decreases the time that you're in the hospital and potentially decreases the risk of more severe infection. Dexamethasone, so far, that's a steroid. It can be an oral or an IV steroid. That's the main agent thus far that has shown to be the most effective for the treatment of severe COVID-19. So if you're in the hospital on oxygen, that really improves mortality, which means you're less likely to die if you receive dexamethasone and you have severe infection than if you do not. Convalescent plasma has been in the news lately. That again, not a silver bullet, that might help certain patients and has been given emergency use authorization from the FDA. I didn't put hydroxychloroquine on there. Hydroxychloroquine initially, early in the pandemic, was an oral medication, typically used to treat things like lupus and even potentially malaria, that was thought to have effectiveness for COVID-19. The more that's been studied, the less impressive that it has looked, and the best done studies have shown that it does not really have much of a benefit at all, and in some cases can cause harm. So not routinely used, even though that has been somewhat politicized and controversial, but in the medical community that the data is clear and it has not been a controversial thing for us. So how do you stay safe and reduce your risk of COVID-19? Main thing, you want to monitor your symptoms. You don't want to let symptoms go too long before potentially seeking medical care and potentially expose others to infection as well. You want to avoid the 3 C's. We're going to talk about the 3 C's in a couple more slides. Wearing a mask. Wearing a mask, again, we'll talk about, but will afford protection mostly to others, but potentially to yourself as well. Wash your hands frequently and often. Social distancing, cleaning and disinfecting surfaces. So monitoring for symptoms. So as I mentioned, the most common symptoms are fever, cough, and shortness of breath. If you feel like you're having any symptoms, it's good to have a thermometer on hand to make sure that you're not running a temperature. Again, if you have a constellation of those other symptoms that I mentioned, as far as muscle aches, occasionally even abdominal pain or diarrhea, monitor, and then loss of smell or taste. I thought it was clever, and another infectious disease doctor online was saying that they test themselves every day by smelling their cup of coffee, and if they can smell their cup of coffee, then they feel pretty good as long as they have no other symptoms. So another trick, that if you all of a sudden you can't smell or taste, that can be the first symptom sometimes, and a good reason to call your doctor and potentially get tested. So I mentioned the 3 C's. So 3 C's, so closed spaces, mostly indoor spaces with poor ventilation. They show an office room here, but that can be any sort of closed space, even in someone else's home. 2, crowded places with many people nearby. And 3, close contact settings, such as close range conversations. So really closed spaces. So again, this virus traveling 6 feet, and again, if ventilation is poor, there's potential for those droplets to build up and cause more likelihood of infection. Crowded places with many people nearby, especially if people aren't wearing masks, indoors is a huge risk. Even outdoors, if you're around a whole lot of people that aren't in your own household, increase your risk as well. Now, close contact settings, like close range conversations, especially without masks, those are ones that can be put yourself at risk as well. Okay. Are we having problems with audio? Can people hear me okay? I'm just seeing the chat now.
We're hearing you intermittently. I am able to hear all your content, Dr. Brady. It's just that you go in and out a little bit, but I'm not sure if we can do anything differently. So I think maybe just continue.
Yeah, I'll get a little bit closer to the microphone just in case that's the.
Yeah, there you go. That might help too. Okay,
Okay, I
great.
apologize.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
All right. So masks. So masks can decrease the spread of droplets and keep others safe. So in the picture here, it's depicting someone that may have coronavirus infection. And this cloth barrier mask is blocking these droplets that can carry virus from getting out into the open. There's a lot of misinformation about there. Inhaling, you're not going to inhale more virus and get more sick. That doesn't happen. This is a way to potentially block the spread in everyday life if you're not having symptoms, especially if you're going out into public. It's been clear also that states and countries with mask mandates have had less transmission of COVID-19. If we look at the data, those areas that have orders to mandate masks, like Oregon and some other places in the United States and around the world, it has been less likely to, there have been less cases of COVID-19. So I did put a link here. This is a link from the CDC that actually has some instructions about how to make your own face covering if you're so inclined and have some sewing skills as well. So you really should use masks when you're around other people who don't live in your household. More layers of the mask is generally better, at least 2 or 3, according to the CDC, if you can. And then masks really, though, are not a substitute for social distancing. They do help, but they're not, again, they wouldn't make you invincible for, spreading or from acquiring COVID-19. And then how to wear a mask properly. We see this, I think many of us are likely familiar seeing people out in the community wearing masks inappropriately. So you want a mask, like I mentioned, that has 2 or more layers of washable and breathable fabric. You want to completely cover your nose and mouth and fit snugly against the sides of your face without any gaps if possible. You don't want a mask that's made of a fabric like vinyl that makes it hard to breathe. You want to be able to breathe through it. We've seen masks like this one here with exhalation valves. So these are valves that allow air to come out but not to come in, and those make it a little more comfortable to breathe in. But again, the purpose of these masks is to stop your air from getting out and these droplets from getting out, and that could still be putting others at risk while helping yourself. N95 masks or N95 respirators or surgical masks, those become a little bit more available. CDC still recommends reserving those for healthcare workers. Surgical masks, at least for our health system and elsewhere, have been a lot easier to come by. N95 respirators, especially the medical kind, have been a little bit more difficult. With the wildfire smoke, there's been a push to try more N95 masks, which can be a little bit more effective against wildfire smoke than other masks as well. So, not really sure about gaiters. So gaiters are really masks that really usually sit around your neck and be pulled up. There's some controversy whether those help or maybe even make things a little bit worse. Face shields also, there is some information to show that they help when they're used with masks, but without a mask, again, effectiveness is really unknown and may be less likely to protect you and others. So a mask doesn't work when you're wearing it around your neck or on your forehead, under your nose. This is a common one here. Only on your nose. I don't think I've seen that one too often. On your chin or from one ear, or putting it on your arm. So really, if you're making the effort to put a mask on, you really want to see if you can do it appropriately also, and make sure to cover your nose because you still have air and droplets coming out of your nose as well. If you wear glasses and you find that your mask is fogging up frequently, you want to try to find a mask that fits very snugly, or if you have a wire that can be pressed against the nose so it fits real snug, that can help. You can occasionally find some anti-fog spray that helps with fogging of glasses. And I've heard also that washing with soap and water and letting things air dry can also help with decreasing fog if that's become a problem for you. So I mentioned hand washing as well. So soap and water for at least 20 seconds. Carrying alcohol-based hand sanitizer with you when you're out and about. So at least 60% alcohol or ethanol. You want to do that, use your hand washing before eating or preparing food or touching your face. Also, after using the restroom, leaving a public place and coming home, blowing your nose, and obviously caring for someone who's sick as well. Social distancing. So keeping 6 feet away from others not in your household, especially without outdoors. Really remembering that some people can feel fine and still transmit this virus, and avoiding those who are sick. So staying apart will really help decrease the chances of transmission. Social bubbles is an interesting phenomenon that has come out of COVID-19, and are really defined as small groups of people, within your household and potentially another household, who are all strict with social distancing and only interact with each other outside of the home. And so there have been, a lot of interest in this where, if you have like-minded families that aren't out socializing with other families, or, usually wearing masks, or only seeing each other, that can be a way to help with some of the feelings of isolation that folks are feeling with COVID-19 as well. So COVID-19 activity risks in general is, outside is better than inside. You want to stay within your social bubble or your household. Avoiding crowds, both inside and outside, is advised. Really going out for essential trips, if possible. If you have the option to, using drive-thrus, curbside pickup, or delivery for food, and not eating inside of a restaurant. Some examples here on the next few slides are some low-risk activities like opening the mail, getting takeout from a restaurant, pumping gasoline, potentially playing tennis, and going camping are fairly low risk. These are activities that are from the Texas Medical Association. You're increasing your risk somewhat, but still low to moderate, with grocery shopping, just because of the volume of people. Doing things outdoors like playing golf, going for a walk, a socially distanced walk, run, or a bike ride with other people. Sitting in a doctor's waiting room, going to a library, museum, again, maintaining social distancing. Eating a restaurant outside better than inside. And then, at a playground, or, walking in a busy downtown, again, trying to wear masks and social distance as well. Increasing the risk, so having dinner at someone else's house outside of your social bubble or your family. A backyard barbecue, again, I might say is a little bit even higher risk. We've seen some outbreaks that have occurred over Memorial Day weekend with backyard barbecues in our 3 counties. Going to the beach if you can maintain distancing, shopping at a mall, swimming in a pool, visiting an elderly relative or friend in their home. Again, this is one that's a little bit on the higher risk side. This is put on as a 6 here, but as long as precautions are taken, that can be safe, and we can talk about that a little more if we have time. Going to a hair salon or barber shop, again, one that you have to wear masks at. Restaurant inside, there's been some recent information showing that might even be a little bit higher risk than a 7. Again, close spaces, people not wearing masks because they're eating, usually talking loudly and socializing. Again, those are all things that increase risk of droplets and transmission. So attending wedding and funeral, hugging or shaking hands when greeting a friend, again, things that increase risk. So high risk activities, eating at a buffet, high risk for other things as well, not just COVID-19, but from an infectious disease perspective, but usually a safe thing outside of COVID-19. Working out at a gym, I don't know of many amusement parks that are open. Going to a movie theater, large gatherings like sports and music concerts, religious services in person inside, and going to a bar, also high risk. So, to summarize, really limit going out to essential tasks as long as COVID-19 is spreading. If you do, wear a mask, avoid others who aren't wearing a mask, and stick with those that are in your own household. Bringing hand sanitizer, use it frequently, and avoid crowded places, especially indoors if you can. So seeking medical care, the CDC just reported yesterday that 4 in 10 adults in the United States have either delayed or avoided medical care because of the COVID-19 crisis. And delaying this care can have serious medical consequences. We've seen this in our hospitals where, all the patients, not all the patients, but many patients in March and April just weren't coming in anymore, and we didn't really understand what was going on. But now over the past few months, that as things have been delayed, people are coming into the hospital sicker and with things that they may not have had if they had been presenting for care earlier. So delaying care is more common among people with disabilities and also those with 2 or more underlying conditions. So two at-risk groups that we really need to try to protect. So medical visits are safe. Medical facilities are safe. We have tons of processes and procedures in place to help with social distancing, with mask use is required for all staff and patients that are coming into any sort of Samaritan facility. And we encourage people not to delay care, because that delaying care can increase your risk more than coming into the office at present. We are advising everyone to keep at least 30 days of medications on hand. Make sure that you're up to date on vaccines. Influenza vaccine is going to be more strongly recommended this year than previous years, just because of the potential for flu and COVID-19 to be spreading at the same time. So getting the influenza vaccine by the end of October is advised. Considering telemedicine, like was mentioned in the previous talk as well, if you're not comfortable coming in. If you have COVID symptoms, calling your doctor first, or doing a telemedicine electronic visit. So Samaritan has set up no charge electronic visits if you're concerned for COVID symptoms, where you're connected with a Samaritan provider, and they can tell you if you require testing and give advice over the computer. Like I mentioned, face coverings are required, and we continue to restrict visitors in the outpatient setting and the inpatient setting, but we are allowing visitors in some cases. So to finish up, vaccine development has been in the news recently, and there's a whole host of vaccines that are in the pipeline here. So 25 in phase 1, which phase 1 is really the testing of safety and dosage of the vaccine. Phase 2, expanded safety trials looking to see if the vaccine is safe in the participants. And then phase 3, which is almost the most important to see, are the vaccines working? Now we have 9 in phase 3. The two the government has put a lot of funding behind is the combination between AstraZeneca and Oxford. That was recently stopped because of a safety issue, but has been resumed. And it's not thought to be a severe safety issue with that vaccine. And then a Moderna and NIH vaccine as well. I think there's a lot of anxiety about rushing a vaccine to market, but I want to assure people on the call, at least in the Samaritan area, I don't feel comfortable giving a vaccine, or even if it's emergency approved, if the data and the safety don't show that it might be safe. Until we have that information, we're going to be very careful about when and if we offer this vaccine. So to summarize, COVID-19 has spread worldwide and is present in the Mid-Willamette Valley. Older age and underlying medical conditions increase the risk of severe illness from COVID-19. Want to make sure that, want to know your risk to help you influence your activities and how you're taking care of yourself. Stay safe by distancing, wearing face coverings, and being prepared. And just know that medical care is safe and essential, and that medical clinics and hospitals are open for business. So thanks for listening and tuning in, and I hope you could hear me okay. I apologize for any technical difficulties. Some helpful links are here, samhealth.org/coronavirus, that a lot of information locally about what you can do to get information and get care for coronavirus concerns. healthoregon.org/coronavirus is the Oregon Health Authority's main web portal. And then the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention website for coronavirus, which is where a lot of these graphics came from, can be a very helpful resource as well. So again, thanks for your attention. Happy to take any questions here in the next 10 minutes or so.
Well, if we were together in a big room, Dr. Brady, we would all be applauding you. And I appreciate the up-to-date information from an expert source on this, because obviously we've been hearing all kinds of things. So thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over to Jackie, because I know that there are questions that some of the participants are going to ask you. So go ahead, Jackie.
Great, thank you. So we do have several questions in the Q&A. Feel free to add others for Dr. Brady. So I think this might have been on one of the slides, but in case somebody missed it, there's a question about asking if face shields are as effective as masks.
Yeah, so the jury is out on that. I think the expert opinion around that issue is that they probably are not as effective as masks, but they are likely better than nothing at all. Okay, so I think it's we wouldn't, when we're caring for patients in the hospital that we're concerned that might have COVID-19, as far as protection goes, we would wear a mask in addition to a face shield, then you would consider to be at risk if you did not have a mask on. So again, my opinion would be that a mask is likely not as effective because there's openings around the side and the bottom that the virus or droplets can float around, which you don't have that same issue with a well-fitting mask.
Great, thank you. There's a question, can COVID carriers be more or less infectious to others? In other words, is someone who has a new raging infection more contagious than someone who's been infected for a while?
Yeah, that's a good question. We're still learning about this. And again, trying to find out, is someone who's asymptomatic, how infectious are they? And the answer is, you can be asymptomatic and likely as infectious as someone who is symptomatic. But again, there's a wide range. You'll hear in the news about super spreaders where some people for one reason or another seem to spread more virus than others. So again, and it depends where you are in the course. So you're probably most infectious around the time that your symptoms come on, and then over time, the copies of that virus go down. And then after 10 days after symptom onset, in most cases, you consider not to be infectious any longer, as long as your symptoms have improved. So the answer is you can be more or less infectious to others, but there's nothing really that we can use to know in the moment whether you're infectious or not to be able to answer that question individually.
Here's a question asking about how long do virus droplets hang in the air outside? If there is no one around, can you walk outside in a neighborhood without a mask?
Yeah, so I would say that you can walk around outside without a mask, again, in the non-wildfire times.
Yes.
No one else is around. Again, well-ventilated areas, and you can't get much more well-ventilated than outside. It's very unlikely that you'll be exposed to droplets hanging in the air. It's stale air areas where you're, inside small spaces that maybe don't have, the adequate air exchanges are what you have to be more worried about.
Here's a question related to inside air. Would you fly on an airplane now?
So that's a good question. I think it depends what the reason for flying would be. I think I would not like to fly on an airplane for pleasure now, unless, if I really had to for, say, an emergency or a funeral. I think it can be done, and it can be done safely. We haven't seen a lot of transmission from airplanes. So again, it would be using caution, flying on an airline that is leaving the middle seats open, which I believe many of them still are. Wearing a mask and possibly even a face shield while you're on an airplane as well. So I think that, I would be more careful about it than pre-COVID times for sure, and only do it if it was absolutely necessary.
Great, thank you. So we have a question. Assuming COVID-19 is mainly a respiratory problem, please explain how ingesting COVID-19, I'm not sure I'm saying this right, virions that get on food get to the lungs. So
there's been very little evidence, or really no evidence, that food products can transmit COVID-19. So ingesting things that may or may not have COVID-19 on them has not been shown to get in the lungs and cause a respiratory infection. So when we're talking about having symptoms like nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, that's usually because you are exposed to the virus through the traditional route, through the respiratory tract, and the virus can actually replicate inside your body and affect different tissues, causing those symptoms. So it has been shown that even with outbreaks at food processing plants, their food has been safe to eat, and it's not thought to cause infection by ingestion of the virus.
Thank you. We have some good questions here.
Yeah, thank you.
I read an article that immunity only lasts for 3 months after infection recovery. Is this true, or are they still in the midst of studying this?
So I think that we are still in the midst of studying this. It's unclear how long immunity lasts. Based on other coronaviruses and the immune response to them, it is thought to be at least 90 days of immunity. And there have been very few, in the 28 million cases, there's been a handful of times when someone has gotten infected again after getting COVID-19 the first time. So the jury's still out on the question. I think right now the assumption is that it's 90 days. It could be longer, it potentially could be shorter, but still more work to be done on that. And then the vaccine studies will maybe be helpful in sorting that out as well.
Great. Here's another question asking if there has been any information regarding the risk of routine dental care.
Yeah, so routine dental care, and then maybe to clarify the risk, there's a risk for the dental practitioner who is, drilling and exposed to the mouth may be higher than yourself going into the dentist. So it's been some controversies with, between some medical groups and the American Dental Association where, you don't want to postpone routine dental care too long, but if you're otherwise healthy and not having any dental problems, it may be a good idea to postpone care until activity in the community has decreased, just so you're not potentially exposing others and exposing yourself. So it seems to be fairly low risk, but again, like anything that we're talking about, if it's not urgent and it's strictly routine as far as cleaning goes, and you don't have any ongoing care or dental problems, it may be okay to postpone that, but probably a good idea to discuss with your dentist and your individual circumstance.
Thank you. So we have, I think, 2 more questions. One is back related to airplanes, and it reads, my understanding from medical sites online is that the actual time spent on an airplane is very low risk and there are no outbreaks traced to air travel. But on the Texas chart that you had showed earlier, the risk is rated fairly high at a number 7. Why is air travel rated so high, and what is dangerous, and how can we mitigate that?
Sure, yeah, so again, the Texas chart, it was from a little bit earlier in the pandemic, so we've had a little bit more information showing that the actual act of being on an airplane, and airplanes themselves actually have pretty good airflow and exchanges, even though it's recirculating. You're right, there has not been a lot of outbreaks, if any outbreaks, traced directly to air travel. Again, there have been cases that are associated with planes as well, among families and others, so it's possible to transmit on planes, but it's, a lot of people are flying and it doesn't seem to be a huge risk. What I get concerned of is, air travel is not just the sitting on the plane, it's you're going through security, you're interacting with people in an airport, and, potentially you're going to restaurants. And so I think the overall active air travel and, what that entails might increase the risk. Whereas if you were just talking about sitting on an airplane for an hour and a half or 2 hours in itself, that might be a little bit lower than a 7, but taken all together, and again, that's not a scientific rating necessarily, but it's taken all together that it might be a slightly increased risk.
Thank you, that's very helpful. So the last question that we have is from early in your presentation, just a point of clarification. You had mentioned talking about improved mortality. Do you mean reduced mortality rates? Is that what you meant by that?
Yeah, I think that was in regards to dexamethasone. So studies have shown that with dexamethasone, mortality rates are lower than if you do not get dexamethasone. So again, less chance of dying if you receive dexamethasone and you have severe COVID-19 that requires you to be on oxygen in the hospital as well.
Thank you. I think those are all the questions that we have, and we're right on time.
Perfect.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brady. That was the best information I think I've seen and heard on COVID. So I really, really appreciate your presence here today.
Of course, not a problem. And feel free to reach out, and hope everyone stays safe out there.
Thank you very much. All right. Well, we're going to I want everyone to stretch, to grab some water as we transition into our next speaker. Before we do that, I just want to give everyone a shout out. One of the reasons that the Aging Summit even happened in the first place is because when I was the originator of the Aging Summit, because I so believe in community education and outreach and getting information to our community members, older adults, family members, everybody. And, but I'm a terrible fundraiser. That's one of the roles on the board. And so I couldn't even sell Girl Scout cookies when I was a kid. It was hard for me. So anyway, I am thrilled to announce that some of you have been just incredibly generous. We're at $900. So we're just $100 short of meeting our $1,000 goal. And this is no pressure. This is only if you want to donate. It's this, our intent was to make this free and accessible to people. But if you so want to, the chat function has the donation information. And thank you. So with that, I want to move on to our next speaker. And I have been I've been looking forward to all these presentations, but given that I slept maybe 2 hours last night, this is a really good one for me. Our next speaker is Dr. Mari Goldner. Her title of her presentation is Sleeping in Stressful Times. Dr. Goldner attended the medical school at Harvard and did her internal medicine residency at Boston City Hospital. And I'm going to encourage Dr. Goldner to go ahead and reveal herself, but she hasn't already done that in terms of her video. There we go. There we go. And we want to make sure that you're unmuted as well, Dr. Goldner. She completed her pulmonary critical care and sleep fellowships at the University of Minnesota and has been practicing sleep medicine for 18 years here in Corvallis. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Goldner to our Aging Summit. So let's go ahead and pull her slides up and get her going.
Thank you so much. And I'm hoping that everyone can hear me just fine. I did unmute that. And
Perfect. You're perfect. We can hear you and see you.
Wonderful. Okay, perfect. Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to talk about something that I think is relevant to a lot of people. Maybe next slide, please. Whoops. So basically, as was alluded to, sleep can be challenging for a lot of people anyway, and these days it is really difficult. There's a lot of stress one can have about one's own risks, what's going on with one's family, particularly with the whole COVID situation, and then there are issues in our country and in our world. So there is a lot to be stressed about, and then particularly in the setting of COVID with increased isolation, inactivity, and then with real changes in how we live our lives, that has a lot of impact on sleep. So next. So in this talk, what I thought I would go over is a few things. Number one is when someone's not sleeping, one of the first questions that we have as clinicians are, is this really insomnia or might it be something else that's with a predominant symptom of I can't sleep? And so the things that we look for to see maybe we could fix this another way. Then I'm going to touch on the math of sleep and define that a little bit later, but that is a huge issue in terms of sleep, the timing of sleep. Then we'll talk about how to strengthen your own natural sleep-wake cycle, the right way to use melatonin and also light. And then I've made up a little, hopefully tantalizing acronym about trying some mead to help you sleep. So next, so going on to the, is it really insomnia? There are a number of kind of classic mimics where the complaint is, I can't sleep, I have insomnia, but some other issues that it might be actually an issue with the underlying clock, might be restless legs, something that really flares up at night. Sleep apnea can disrupt sleep. Some other medical conditions that are notorious for getting a bit worse at night and sometimes aren't completely obvious. And then there are medications and other substances that can be affecting sleep. So kind of going through those one by one, let's go to the clock problems. So next slide. Some people are really just wired as night owls. We're all born with some kind of clock. Either we're a night owl, we're a morning person, somewhere in between. And then people have different degrees of how robust their clock is. For some people, it's really just more of a preference. For other people, that is how they are hardwired. And in general, larks, as in morning people, are unbelievably lucky. They're up early, they are cheerful in the morning, they don't need that much sleep. They are the early birds that gets the worm. And night owls, unfortunately, are really kind of cursed. And it's actually sort of a four-part curse. They can't fall asleep when they'd really like to. They'd have to get up when they're wired to be naturally asleep, just because our society tends to run on on an early bird's clock. They tend to always be short on sleep because in general, night owls are longer sleepers, really needing 8, 9, 10 hours to be well rested, as opposed to those irritating morning people who are cheerful at 6 hours of sleep. And then it becomes a setup for lifetime insomnia because people have never associated bedtime with falling asleep, and they have a lot of anxiety about falling asleep. So the one thing I would say is, I think that a lot of people in today's audience are kind of older. Consider yourself so lucky if you are a night owl to be retired, because ideally that means that you have a lot more control over your clock and are able to keep the hours that you are wired to keep. And I would just encourage people, if you're wired as a night owl, bless your heart for putting up with a morning-oriented career for as long as you did, but now you get to keep the hours you are wired to keep, and that's really okay. There is no moral virtue in getting up early, despite what your lark spouse says. So encouragement to just live as you are wired. Next slide, please. So restless legs, and what restless legs it refers to is the feeling of restlessness. So if you think you have restless legs because your legs feel funky, then you do have restless legs. It's a kind of a hard to define sensation of needing to move the legs. Definitely gets worse at night. If it's the same feelings all through the day and night, it's maybe something other than restless legs. There's certain conditions that can make this worse: iron deficiency, pregnancy, kidney disease. Leg jerks, that's different from restless legs. Leg jerks, or PLMS, periodic limb movements of sleep, those are the leg movements which may be accompanied by a sensation of restlessness. But that's actually kind of different. Leg jerks or periodic limb movements, that has to do with the movement itself. And it doesn't mean that the person has restless legs, and only about a third of the time does it actually disturb the leg owner's sleep. It might disturb a bed partner's sleep, and that's another thing to think about, but they don't always need treatment. Now, most people are aware if their legs are keeping them up. That's rarely something they need a specialist to diagnose for them, but there are treatments for this. Often people don't think it rises to the level of bringing it to a doctor's attention, but it can be utterly miserable, and there's really things we can do about it. So mention it to your doctor. Next slide. Sleep apnea, the bread and butter of sleep medicine, that refers to having the upper airway, nose to vocal cords relax too much in the wrong place when the person falls asleep, and then it'll open up again either because a loving elbow comes over, or way more often an alarm goes off in the brain saying, hey, you're not breathing, wake up a little bit. Sometimes it's obvious. It's definitely more obvious in men, kind of for two reasons. They tend to snore a little bit more loudly. They tend to wake up gasping a little bit more loudly. The other thing is, they often, not always, but often sleep next to women who are good at noticing their apnea. And after about 10 years of being told that he snores and stops breathing, many men are willing to look into that. Women, it's a lot more subtle. They don't always snore. They can be quieter. And then also the men that they sleep next to, even wonderful men, really don't notice an awful lot. And so often women, the presentation is unexplained nighttime awakenings, and then non-restorative, unrestful sleep. Sleep apnea is definitely something that comes in small, medium, and large. And a little bit of sleep apnea, especially if the person doesn't have a lot of symptoms, that does not have to be treated. But the medium to large, as in many events per hour, bad oxygen drops, that's really not good for you. And it can take a toll on your brain, sleep quality, alertness, and therefore driving safety, real effects on the cardiovascular system in terms of rates of high blood pressure, heart attack, stroke. It also, having alarms go off, surges of adrenaline, worsened diabetes, slow metabolism. So lots of reasons where worth investigating and treating if it's more than just kind of trivial apnea. And then for all the word on the street, oh, they'll just give you a mask that you'll hate. Things get better and better. I mean, partly this is a huge market. So there is a lot of money to be made in making nice, flexible, comfortable, adjustable masks, quiet machines. This stuff gets better and better. So really, for all the people out there who may have had a bad experience in the past but are still suffering the effects of sleep apnea, come on back and let us try to impress you with what we have these days. So next slide. Other medical conditions that can disrupt sleep. some of these are more obvious than others. Heartburn or reflux, a lot of people know when they have that, but sometimes they don't. And so that is a treatable condition. Heart failure often gets worse at night, especially as there's redistribution of body fluids and things coming back into the lungs. So often breathing worsens at night in people with heart failure. Asthma often can be worse at night, both for its own intrinsic patterns, allergens in the bedroom, arthritis and joint pains. For some people, that's really bothersome at night, especially when they spend a long time in a relatively still position. They can stiffen up and then have a lot of pain. Now, most of the time, people are aware of these issues and can say, okay, I know my asthma is worsening my sleep. Let me step up my asthma therapy. But these are things to think about when somebody's sleep is getting of worse quality. Next. Medications that affect sleep. This is often not so well recognized, beta blockers. And so these are some of the common names out there. These are medications used for high blood pressure. They can affect sleep in terms of the timing of sleep, staying asleep. Also, dreams can be affected by beta blockers. Inhalers, especially if you don't have the greatest technique, because these tend to have a bit of kind of adrenaline-like chemicals. So if you squirt it right at the back of your throat and it gets absorbed, that can really kind of wake you up. So good techniques, adding a spacer, maybe changing the delivery device. Diuretics, absolutely. Some people think, okay, well, I'm supposed to take my Lasix twice a day, so I'll take it at 8 in the morning and 8 at night. Often people who are choosing the timing of their own medications don't do that to themselves, but some people aren't in charge of when they get their medication. So looking at that and making sure that you don't take a diuretic close to bedtime. Lasix, the trade name for furosemide, it was because that tends to last about 6 hours. So I guess I would say 2 things there. Number 1, try to take it with that in mind so that you have you're not peeing right when you're wanting to be sleeping. But the other thing is, if you're peeing at night, don't blame it on the Lasix that you took that morning. Actually, people pee more at night. They make more pee when they have untreated sleep apnea. So your Lasix should have worn off. Look for other causes from peeing at night rather than the morning Lasix. Some antidepressants, probably in clinical practice, the 2 that I see the most is causing sleep problems. Lexapro or escitalopram and Wellbutrin tend to have stimulant properties and so are best taken in the morning. But different people are different. If you know that actually your antidepressant makes you sleepy, we'll take it at night. If your Lexapro makes you sleepy, take it at night. Don't listen to me. And then alcohol, commonly used actually as a sleep aid. And definitely the initial effect of alcohol is to make people sleepy, but then its metabolites disrupt sleep. Metabolites of alcohol have some stimulant properties. They also have diuretic effects. And then depending on what you drank, there may be just the liquid there. So the net effect is to worsen sleep quality. So next slide. So coming to the math of sleep, I think this is a hugely unrecognized and under-recognized issue. And so the math of sleep, next slide, please, really refers to the timing of sleep. And in general, us humans, we are wired to be awake for roughly 16 hours and then to sleep for roughly 8 hours. And so there is real fallout from that, which is that when you get up has huge impact on the time you are going to be able to fall asleep. So if you get up, and that creates kind of an easy vicious cycle, because if for some reason you don't sleep very well, there's a real tendency to sleep a little bit later in the day because you didn't fall asleep. But if you get up at 9 in the morning, 16 hours later is going to be more like 1 a.m. So if for whatever reason you slept in until 9, don't expect to be able to fall asleep at 10 o'clock at night just because that's your usual bedtime or that's when you would like to fall asleep. You're not going to be able to do that because not enough time has passed, both in terms of time on the clock, but also in terms of how much time you were awake and therefore kind of accruing some sleep debt, how much sleep you owe your brain. That also means that those daytime naps where you pay off that sleep debt affect things. So there's the timing, what time did you get up, but also did you have 16 hours of being awake or did you take a 2 or 3 hour nap in the afternoon? That will affect things. So basically, if you got up at 9 in the morning and you can't fall asleep or 10 or 11 at night, that's not insomnia, that's really just math. It's to be expected. And so you want to take that into account in the timing of things. So next slide. So with this, what we try to do is then kind of try to find a nice compromise. Pick a rise time appropriate for when you go to bed, and also vice versa. Pick a bedtime appropriate for when you get up. Now, that does not mean you have to get up at the absolute crack of dawn, but it just means if 16 hours hasn't gone by, don't call it insomnia. It's just math. When you wake up is where you have the most control of this. So especially if you're trying to get out of that vicious cycle of sleeping in, and therefore not being able to fall asleep and then sleeping in again, the place that you have the most control is when you get up. Because people who haven't been able to fall asleep, you know very well, you cannot make yourself fall asleep. You can't try harder to fall asleep, pray to fall asleep. The harder you work at it, the farther away it gets. So when you get up, at least it may not be pleasant, it may not be easy, but it's possible. So that's where we kind of start to say, okay, can you get up by 8 o'clock? Because if you can get up by 8 o'clock, you should be able to fall asleep around midnight. And once you're doing that consistently, well, then we can move that. Okay, how about a little bit earlier? Maybe get up at 7:30 and then think you can fall asleep about 11:30. So where we start is when you get up, but finding that compromise is just fine. You don't have to get up at the crack of dawn. Next slide. So we also think about strengthening natural sleep-wake cycles when we're working on sleep timing. And melatonin is the most powerful internal influence on the human clock. That's a naturally occurring hormone made deep in the brain, in the pineal gland in the brain. Melatonin is marketed as a sleeping pill, and for some people it does work, but I would say just sort of in clinical practice, I'd say it's maybe 15%, maybe 1 out of 6 people it actually acts like a sleeping pill. And if that's what's true for you, fabulous. You are lucky. You are a cheap date. That's wonderful. But for most people, it doesn't work like a sleeping pill, because in the human body, it's not a sleeping pill, it's a clock pill. It has to do with what time is it in the brain, what is it, the circadian system. And so interestingly, low doses work better than high doses. Total testimony to the fact that it's a clock pill, not a sleeping pill. Because a sleeping pill, if you took it at 10 times the appropriate dose, you might end up looking like Michael Jackson, but you would definitely fall asleep. So the low doses seem to work better. And in a way, especially in older people, you can honestly think about taking a little bit of melatonin in the evenings or at bedtime as hormone replacement therapy for sleep, because probably part of why older people don't sleep quite as well, particularly staying asleep, is they have less robust melatonin cycling. So in general, the recommendations are to help you fall asleep to take low dose melatonin, 300 micrograms, that's 0.3 milligrams, about 5 hours before you'd like to fall asleep. That's kind of the starting place we use for all comers. If you try that and find out, oh, you know what, about 2 or 3 hours I'm sleepy, okay, that's what's true in you. Then take it 2 or 3 hours before you'd like to go to bed. But certainly kind of the advice we give when people are really struggling with being very much night owls is we start at 5 hours before desired sleep onset or bedtime. To help you stay asleep, it's that similar low dose, 300 micrograms, 0.3 milligrams at bedtime. That isn't to help you fall asleep, because it's not a sleeping pill, it's a clock pill. What we're trying to do there with that bedtime dose is to put kind of a normal brain level of melatonin in the middle of the night. So before you've had the wherewithal to realize, I'm awake, what time is it? What your brain's already done to say, what time is it? Your brain has looked at what's our melatonin level. Is it a normal middle of the night level, like it's the middle of the night and you should just go back to sleep? Or is it kind of low because perhaps you're older and you don't make as much melatonin, and so your brain's thinking maybe it's time to be awake? Or if you took a 3 or a 5 or a 10 milligram dose of melatonin, do you have such a ridiculously high level of melatonin in your brain that the brain just has no idea what time it is and decides, I'm just going to ignore it? That's not a very scientific way of putting it, but that's my kind of explanation for why those big doses just don't work, because they don't create physiologic levels. So that melatonin, a few hours before bedtime, that's whispering to the brain, night is coming, get ready. And then the bedtime melatonin is to put the normal physiologic level of melatonin in the brain so that the middle of the night seems like the middle of the night to the brain when it looks at its own clock. Now, caveats here, it won't make you sleepy because it's not a sleeping pill, and it takes about 1 to 2 weeks to work. Melatonin really doesn't take over the clock, it's more like it trains the clock. Where do you get melatonin? For years and years, I think all of us in Corvallis clinics Clinic Sleep Medicine, I have recommended Sundown brand melatonin. It's been out for a long time. Clinically, it seems like it is a good, reliable dose. If you know where to get it, it's easy to find. Corvallis Clinic pharmacies have it. Samaritan pharmacies have it. You can buy it on Amazon. It is nice and cheap. It's at the Corvallis Clinic. It's $4.99 for 120 pills. Winco also has it. They just don't always have it in stock. I think Trader Joe's sells 1 milligram pills. And so if you take half of that, you're getting pretty close. That's 500 micrograms, which is close enough. You're doing that small dose. So that's melatonin. Then next slide. The other part of the sleep-wake cycle is light. Light is the most powerful external influence on the human clock. Melatonin's from the inside, light on the outside. And so that's kind of two things. There's blue light. Blue light, what we get from the sky and have for hundreds of thousands of years, that's what tells the brain it's daytime, be awake, turn off your melatonin. Unfortunately, we get a lot of blue lights from screens, particularly televisions. You can tell somebody has a TV on through windows outside their or curtains outside their house because you can see all that blue. Computers often a little bit less blue, but you sit so close, you're getting a lot of the blue, and then on your phone. So we get a lot of mileage by blocking this blue light. And so blue blocking lenses, there are different ways to use blue blocking lenses. The most powerful one is to put them on your nose, get some blue blocking glasses. We sell them through the Corvallis Clinic Sleep Medicine, but we buy them from Airgas on 9th Street for about $15. You can get either glasses that look fairly cool, orange glasses with a kind of cool black rim. You can get kind of clunky glasses that look like you bought them from a welding supply company that go over your glasses. Those are the most effective. You can get blue blocking filters that you can put on your phone and have automatically come up. You can get them on your computer. Those are helpful, but it isn't as much benefit as putting glasses on. So there's blocking that blue light so that your own melatonin is secreted, and your own melatonin then goes kind of by definition to just the right places in your brain. The pill, we kind of hope you remember to take it, hope it gets absorbed, hopes it gets into your brain at the right doses. The blue blocking lenses work, let your own melatonin do its job. Then the other part of light is exposing yourself to bright light when you get up. This has kind of two roles. There's one is just kind of starting day, which if you're a real night owl, it may be painful. You may not like light in the morning, but it's helpful to tell that brain it is daytime, it is time to be awake. But what we use this also for in sleep medicine is that we're trying to start that countdown, that 16-hour countdown to sleep onset the next night. So the more powerfully you tell your brain day has started, the more powerfully you've also told your brain, start your countdown, we're going to be falling asleep in about 16 hours. So it has a real role in falling asleep to kind of powerfully start daytime with light. And then combining this with movement, social interactions, eating, like get outside, take a walk with a friend, those kinds of things really add to that. This is Corvallis, and winter is coming, so it's going to be dark, so you might want to think about a light box, kind of getting yourself a pharmacologic dose of light. Those are relatively readily available in various sources. Those cost a bit of money, but you can get a decent light box for probably around $75, and something you would use first thing in the morning. So next. So then the mead, perhaps people have been wondering, okay, what is this mead? And this is my little invented acronym for a few other things to help with sleep. So moving through those, next slide. Mindful meditation and kind of variants on that, exercise, taking action, and possibly, but last for a reason, drugs. So let's go through those one at a time. The mindful meditation, and so this isn't necessarily sitting there saying Om, but that is a good thing to do, but kind of ways that you can calm your brain both before and kind of during your bedtime routine. And so for different people, that's going to be different things. Meditative reading, really at night, if you have trouble falling asleep, don't read anything at night that you would have read for interest or pleasure during the day. Do something meditative, read some poetry, perhaps find a favorite poem and read that same poem over and over and over again. Psalms, whatever resonates with you, but something that is calming and meditative rather than interesting and keeping you going. Guided imagery these days, actually there are all sorts of apps available for this. These are just a couple of these. If you just go to the App Store and put in sleep, you can find all sorts of things. Ones that I think are particularly well done. There's one called Calm that has both guided imagery, guided meditations. You can actually have bedtime stories on the Calm app. Pizziz is another one with kind of a great British voice to listen to as you're trying to fall asleep. Those can be helpful. Nature sounds, that can be a nice thing to listen to rather than having a television on. Absolutely, television is wrong on so many levels when you're trying to fall asleep. That blue light, that human voice, that design to grab your attention. No. But nature sounds, you can get sound machines, you can get apps there, you can get things that you can kind of vary a little bit. And that can kind of also give you a little bit of something for some visual imagery with your eyes closed to kind of hold your brain in one place rather than having it shooting off in different directions. Then if meditation kind of calls to you, there are lots of resources there. I think there's a kind of entertaining book called Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics by Dan Harris. He kind of famously had a panic attack as a newscaster on national television, and that ended up in his really pursuing meditation and changing his career. And he wrote this kind of interesting and entertaining book. Headspace is an app that we recommend so often. It's a beautiful introduction to meditation that's just well done. And then you can, after you've kind of gone through the intro program, then you can decide, okay, do you want to now pursue meditation targeting sleep, anxiety, focus, efficiency, all sorts of things. It's a nice resource. So next slide. Then the A in MEAD would be action, because when things are stressful, taking some action, feeling like you did something, I think is really calming, and is also a good thing at the end of the day to have something where you felt like, okay, I did something, as opposed to another wasted day, things are bad, I haven't done anything, there's nothing I can do, I'm helpless. Taking action can actually be, I think, at night kind of relaxing, because you did something, you can put it down. So if you're worried about the state of the world, then do something. There are so many groups out there now in person, less so, but there are things that you can do online. Groups like this with audio and visual, or just groups that you can participate in. You can write letters of encouragement to others. These are just some little things. There's a wonderful book out there called Active Hope with just many suggestions for things that you can do so that at the end of the day, you feel like you have done something, that you aren't lying there stewing more. You can reflect on having had some meaning in your day. So things to think about there. Then next, the E, exercise. This is huge. The best sleep aid on the planet is getting physically tired. And so its absence, people feel. And I think the idea, get good and tired. When you think about that phrase, when you hear somebody say, oh yeah, I slept well last night, I was good and tired, they are always referring to physical tired, because absolutely, if just mental or emotional tiredness were enough to have people sleeping well, this would be unprecedented good sleep times in this country and this world. And in fact, it's kind of the exact opposite. So with that being said, these are difficult times because for exercise, partly, especially as we all get older and accrue physical limitations, that puts some limits on how much you can exercise. It's hard if your time is taken up caring for someone else. That makes it difficult. And then hard during a pandemic, and you can see the timing of these slides because I made these slides up prior to wildfires decimating our air quality and having us all indoors. But thinking about what can you do? What can you creatively do that's realistic to get a little bit of physical exercise? What can you bring into your home? And there are little exercise pedal things that you can buy online and exercise while you're watching television. I think in terms of the exercise, doing something you like is an important thing to take into account, because you're not going to sustain doing something you don't like. So other forms of exercise, dancing, walking, walk someone else's dog, you've done something good, lots of things to that can give you a source of pleasure. Tai Chi or yoga, things that are very modifiable, where you are doing some meaningful movement, but that is very adaptive to whatever your own personal limitations are. And these are also things that have a lot of resources available online. So next. Drugs and substances. And so often people think in a sleep talk, this is going to be the primary focus. And I really think, honestly, this should kind of be the last thing that we should come to. And even having said drugs and substances, I'm not going to talk about any of those for a minute, because I think something to have in mind when you're thinking about using any kind of substance is how to get the most out of it. And so my standard analogy, that perhaps is not wildly positive, but I haven't been able to come up with something better, is that falling asleep is kind of like falling over the edge of a cliff. And basically a good sleep aid, and there are lots of them out there, but a good sleep aid can give you about a 10-foot push. As in, if you're 8 feet from the edge of that cliff and you get a 10-foot push, that's going to work for you. You're going to fall over the edge of the cliff and it'll be all right. If, however, you're 15 feet from the edge of the cliff, as in it's 10 o'clock at night and you did not get up until 9 in the morning, or you napped half of the afternoon, or you did not get physically tired, or you've been drinking coffee all day, or 3 out of those 4, a 10-foot push is not going to work. Maybe it'll knock you down, but it's not going to work. So one of the things you want to do is get yourself with, if you're going to take a substance, if you're going to avail yourself of that, at least get yourself to within 8 feet of the cliff in terms of the timing, how tired you are, where you are mentally, maybe what your melatonin level is. Is it rising in that natural way because you took your early low dose melatonin? And so some substances that you might want to think about if you have done all those things to get yourself within 8 feet of the edge of the cliff: CBD and medications. So next slide. CBD, which would be cannabidiol, so the medical part of medical marijuana. And I will simply say, these are my own personal opinions as a clinician. I am not stating particular policies or positions from my academic affiliation or my employer. But I will say that when you're treating insomnia, for so many people, especially these days, anxiety is a huge part of why that person can't sleep. When you talk with people these days particularly, it's rare that somebody says, oh, you know what, I'm perfectly calm, I'm not worried about anything, my mind is calm, I'm just not falling asleep. That's rare. It's anxiety. And I think that's one of the reasons that a substance that targets anxiety is so important, and why some of the other substances don't work so well, because if they just kind of slug you a little bit and make you groggy but aren't treating your anxiety, you are going to need a lot of that other substance to actually fall asleep. CBD, if you find the right strain for you, and that is kind of another issue, because there are lots of different strains out there and we're all significantly different. But if you find something that helps with relaxation, anxiety, and also pain, that is a powerful thing in helping you fall asleep. Another advantage of CBD is that it's very adjustable. You aren't limited to, okay, 1 pill, half a pill. If you have an edible or a tincture, you can adjust the dose to yourself. You can also adjust the dose to your level of alertness or not. And then what time is it? Is it the beginning of the night where maybe you want a little bit more, or you woke up in the night and you just want a little teeny bit to take the edge off? This is very adjustable. And then safer and more effective than traditional sleeping pills. I think one of the big issues there, particularly in older people, is CBD is targeting anxiety, and some of the other medications that we often use are more just kind of slugging the person and making them globally groggy. So if they're groggy and anxious, that's a potentially concerning combination. So in terms of how you take your CBD, smoking is bad for you. Smoking anything is bad for you. And it's also, when we think about sleep, it's the wrong kind of pharmacokinetics, the way the drug works, because when you smoke something, it works quick, it gets absorbed very quickly. That means it's going to start acting very quickly, but it's also going to be metabolized very quickly. When you take it by mouth or rectally, which is available, then it's absorbed a little bit more slowly, and it also is metabolized more slowly and acts longer, which is really what we want for sleep. And then just for a little boost for rectal administration, there are CBD suppositories available in dispensaries and also online. And a couple things there. Number one, I would say if you are a normal person, there really is nothing recreational about a suppository. The other thing is that I have definitely seen rectal administered CBD work better than orally administered CBD in the same person. My sense, there's very little research on this because there aren't big drug companies funding this, but I'm presuming that this is because you've avoided what's called the first pass metabolism. When you have to take something orally, a lot of this goes then through the liver. Beautiful design in the body to detoxify and get rid of potentially dangerous substances, but you can also lose a fair bit. Some people clearly lose a lot, but if they take it rectally, you've avoided the liver clearing out that CBD. And it also can have kind of a slower onset and duration of action, which is nice. One thing to say, we think about this, oh, it's natural, oh, it's a supplement, I don't need to talk to my doctor, it's different than a medicine. This actually does affect metabolism of other medications if you're using it regularly. And so it's important for your doctor or pharmacist to know if you're going to be using this regularly, that may affect other drugs. Next slide, and we'll finish up here. There are, though, for when it's appropriate, prescription sleep aids. There are the designer's drugs, Ambien, Sonata, Lunesta, and they're all working on the same kind of receptor in the brain. Designer sleep drugs, as in they go to the sleep center in the brain, not so much to other places, and they were designed for sleep. Sonata, which generic name is Zaloplan, is short-acting. Depending on the dose, it's between an hour and a half to maybe 4 hours. Best studied in older people, and can be a nice gentle sleep aid. Antidepressants are commonly used. Trazodone probably most commonly, but another one, mirtazapine or Remeron, doxepin or Silenor can be used. Also, what are called major tranquilizers, medications that are used in much higher doses in people with psychosis. We use them in very low doses, sometimes with calming effects. Seroquel or quetiapine or Zyprexa or olanzapine are common ones. Here, dizziness, falling, hangover, and long-term associations with dementia, some real concerns there, but these medications do have a role. So, next slide. So just kind of a recap. When you're trying to sleep in stressful times, think about the timing of your sleep, controlling other conditions. Remember that math, it is huge. Don't expect to fall asleep until about 16 hours after you got up. Think about low dose melatonin, utterly safe and natural. Use light to your advantage, block that blue light in the evening, bright light in the morning. Relax your mind, tire your body, do something to help and feel good about, and then let it go. And if you've done all of that and you still need a little something, we've got some other options. Okay, next. Thank you.
Dr. Goldner, thank you very much for your presentation. We really appreciate it. We have some questions. I'm going to turn it over to Sunita Vastev, who will be presenting those questions to you, so you don't have to read them on your own, okay? Go ahead, Sunita. Sunita, we can't hear you. Are you muted?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
I just said, thank you, Dr. Goldner. The question is, what advice do you have for LOC caregivers awake from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. and their OWL care needers who don't wake up until 11 or noon and stay awake until 3 a.m.?
That is I wish I had better advice. I think that the things that come to mind would be, number one, trying to see if you can have some programmed respite in there so that you can just sort of cope and get by on a few days, knowing that you had a day or two a week, if possible, to actually catch up on your sleep. And then optimizing the sleep that you can get. If there is a time that you are able to sleep and not need to be responsible and awake and alert for somebody else, then perhaps that is a time where medication to just be able to go to sleep quicker than you could with all your worries for that time, figuring, okay, this is not going to be for your entire life, but to get through this time. I think that would be reasonable. And then I guess the other thing is, what help can there be for that person who's needing so much care in the night? What can be done about their sleep? That's where certainly light and melatonin to try to help regularize the sleep-wake cycles of the person who's needing care is huge. Being awake during the day, active stimulation, lots of light during the day, evening melatonin, no blue light, and optimizing sleep conditions for that person.
Thank you. The next question is, when should you exercise so that you don't disrupt your sleep?
That's a really good question. The party line is that you shouldn't exercise within 3 hours of wanting to go to sleep, because when you raise your core body temperature, that tends to diminish sleep. Part of natural sleep onset is a dropping of core body temperature. So that is kind of the generic party line advice, is exercise during the morning, daytime, afternoon, not in the evening. The two caveats I would say there is, number one, some exercise is usually better than no exercise. It also can be a very nice stress reliever. And if the only time you have to be able to exercise is in the evenings, I would say do it. Maybe seeing, okay, maybe you don't get to do as strenuous exercise because you find that that takes away from your sleep quality. But something is better than nothing. And then also, people are different. There are some people where that advice just doesn't pertain to them. They can run vigorously and then come home, take a shower, and go to sleep. So I would say see what's true in yourself, and earlier is better, but if you can't, do what you can when you can.
Okay, thank you. The other one is, there is no empirical evidence that CBD works for sleep. Is that correct?
I would say in terms of peer-reviewed literature and that kind of thing, there is certainly not a lot, but there is an enormous amount of, so there isn't a lot of evidence-based medicine, in part because there's no big drug company with one single preparation. And that has a lot to do with it. So there is not a lot of evidence-based medicine for CBD. There is a lot of medicine-based evidence. If you practice medicine and you listen to people, there is a lot of evidence out there, and I think that's different than anecdotal evidence. So no, there is not a lot in the literature, but I think that is not a function of lack of efficacy. It's lack of data gathering for a lot of reasons. Not all of them medical, a lot of them political and pharmacologic lobby, pharmaceutical lobby influence.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And then we have another question. Is there any evidence to suggest that taking melatonin to your body not being able to produce it naturally?
That's a really good question. No, the answer is no. There are definitely systems in the body, for example, hormonal systems like steroids. If you take steroids consistently, like prednisone, your own adrenal glands will kind of go on vacation and decide they don't need to produce it. Or thyroid hormone, where there's what's called feedback inhibition. Melatonin, no, it really doesn't work that way. That's a very good question. This is a different kind of system.
Okay. Does taking a warm bath at night help with sleep, or inhibit it because it raises body temperature?
That's a good question too. These are wonderful questions. For most people, a warm bath is very helpful, both because it is relaxing, but the other thing is body temperature increases, but you get enough vasodilation that when you get out of the tub, that will lead to a decrease in body temperature because you have dilated peripheral blood vessels. So it typically is helpful, and we don't see that as a source of increase of core body temperature, because it's different from having your muscles be generating energy.
Okay, thank you. And then we have another one. Is it really harmful to take diphenhydramine to help me sleep? I used to take it and stopped because of the warnings about it causing dementia. Now I use Tylenol on occasion, but it doesn't work as well as Benadryl did.
Right. So I think there is a concern that there are now multiple well-done big studies associating any sedative hypnotic, any kind of medication used to promote sleep with dementia. And I think we need to take those seriously. That being said, not sleeping is also associated with dementia. We know that during sleep, there's kind of clear out of brain metabolites and proteins that have to do with Alzheimer's. So sleep is pretty important. That's where what I would say is kind of coming back to doing all the non-drug things you can to decrease your need for something like Benadryl is good. So thinking about what we talked about before, what's your state of mind, how physically tired you are, what are the timing of things. I would say do everything that you can. But if you need a little something, don't stress about that. Diphenhydramine, if you're taking it in a relatively small dose, like 25 to 50 milligrams, especially if it's just perhaps a couple times a week, that in general, there's what's called a dose response to the sedative hypnotics, as in the more you take for more time, the greater association with dementia. So smaller doses intermittently, almost certainly less harmful. And I think the other thing to think about is that a very good role of any sleep aid is actually just to sit there in the bathroom, diffusing your anxiety about sleeping, rather than saying, I can't ever take Benadryl again. Just say, okay, I'm hoping I don't have to take it tonight, but I'm not going to worry about it. If I'm not asleep in 20 minutes, I'll go get my Benadryl. That kind of thing. If just having it in the bathroom is helpful, fabulous.
Wonderful, thank you. And then I'm just going to say there are two comments, just comments, and one of them is about mead and instead of alcohol. And also a 91-year-old participant has just said he counts backward from 50 to 0, and it works for him to sleep.
And those are beautiful things. So mead versus alcohol, I had my little mnemonic there, just kind of as a goofy acronym that, so I think it has some alcohol in it, and I can't comment on it being much different than alcohol. I think it's in excess would still have the potential problems with stimulant effects and diuretic effects. Might be maybe nutritionally a little bit better than bourbon, but and then the counting backwards, those sorts of things, those mindful kind of things, counting backwards, walking through your childhood home, those are wonderful things to just kind of hold the brain in a kind of meditative place until the Sandman finally gets there. Those are great things, and sharing tips with others is wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Goldner. We appreciate this information a lot. It's essential to well-being, as you know. And I know that this is a really important topic to so many of us. So thank you. I'm going to need to move on to the last thing of our event, and that is we have, in past aging summits, we get lots of questions from our audience, from our participants, just on different topics related to aging. And I'm going to pass the last bit of time that we have over to Heidi Igarashi, who is our past president of the board of the Gray Center. She's also a caregiver to her mother who lives with vascular dementia. She was a mental health counselor for 26 years and began a PhD program in aging because she felt she lacked a roadmap of the road ahead with no real understanding of the aging process. She earned her degree 4 years ago and continues to research and write about the intersection of resilience, optimal aging, and wisdom. And she's going to be facilitating an expert panel that she'll introduce to you right now. So I'll go ahead and, Heidi, if you want to go ahead and get started, that would be great.
Okay, hi everyone, and thank you all for those great presentations. For the panelists, if you'll be sure to unmute yourself and let us see your great faces. Tom, I think we're just missing you. So let me start with Christy. And Christy Fitch is the Senior Core Administrative Assistant for the Oregon Cascade West Council of Governments, commonly known as the COG. And the Senior Core programs include RSVP, foster grandparents, and senior companions. And these programs provide volunteer experiences for those 55 and older who want to help fill service gaps in their community. So Christy's interest in older adults began when she became primary caregiver and legal guardian for her grandmother, who lived with and eventually died of Alzheimer's disease. After moving to Oregon, Christy completed a postbaccalaureate in gerontology at Western Oregon University, I think with Margaret, right? Confirming her purpose to engage and enrich the lives of older adults. And so an interesting tidbit, when Christy isn't working at COG, she's a wife, mother to a nearly teenage daughter, and fosters cats for a local rescue. And she invites questions about programs for seniors and their caregivers available through COG. And they include Medicaid, Medicare counseling, food assistant, and Oregon Project Independence. Right. Next, I'd like to introduce Barb Hansen. Barb, if you can raise your hand, thanks. Barb is an RN who has worked in end-of-life care since 1986 as a nurse care manager, home health and hospice program director, home care surveyor for the Joint Commission, and as a wound ostomy nurse. Currently, Barb serves as the CEO for the Oregon Hospice and Palliative Care Association and Executive Director of Washington State Hospice and Palliative Care Organization. In her spare time, and I can attest to this, Barb is a great baker, enjoys camping, and trying to get her basset hound to walk nicely on his leash. Barb is also a Grace Center board member, and she invites you to ask questions about the benefits and limitations for obtaining hospice, home health, and palliative care, and questions about what's wrong with our funding for these services and why we as a country underutilize these important services. And last but not least is Tom Field. And Tom is the owner and pharmacist at Rice Pharmacy in Corvallis, and also a Grace Center board member. He has over 30 years of experience working in retail pharmacy. And Tom's areas of expertise, including the appropriate use of medications based on age, underlying health conditions, drug-drug interactions, and drug-disease interactions. And incidentally, Rice's Pharmacy has, if some of you didn't see it in the chat, the proper dose of melatonin by sundown. Is that the name of the company?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Shameless plug, sorry.
Oh, no, well, I was thinking about how to get a hold of that, and it's nice when things are in the right dosage. So, I think that, Sunita, you'll be fielding questions from our participants, and don't be shy, ask away, and if we don't have an answer, we'll certainly research it and find an answer for you, okay? So do we have any questions yet?
I have a question. This is Margaret, and I can't actually type into the box I'm posting this, so I'm going to ask it. And it's, if I have a parent or a spouse or a partner or someone I care about, a neighbor that is really experiencing some increased difficulties in living on their own, Christy, what would be some steps that I would take to access potentially some resources? So if you could explain a little bit about the types of programs that are offered there and how we could make referrals to you.
Yeah, so I would highly recommend, we have the Aging and Disability Resource Connection at the COG, and we serve Lynn, Benton, and Lincoln counties. But Aging and Disability Resource Connection is also statewide. It's in multiple states. It's just a wonderful resource. It's kind of like a one-stop shop to get referred to programs that could assist you in your community, especially for your loved ones. And so that's kind of our gateway into the services that the COG offers. They will talk with the consumer and their loved one and, you know, kind of navigate and refer to the different programs that we offer. So if they want to apply for Medicaid, or they want to see if there's any family caregiver support that's available, or if they want to be referred to for a senior companion, that's really the start to get the referrals going for those services, as well as Meals on Wheels if they want to have that be available for their loved one. It's just a wonderful resource that when I talk with consumers and their family members, I say keep that number in your back pocket, because you never know what you're going to need, and they really are truly the gateway for those services, and not just in Lynn, Benton, and Lincoln counties, but statewide as well.
Thank you, Christy. I appreciate the answer.
You're welcome.
We don't have any questions just yet, so I'll ask Barb a question. What do you recommend people should do if they do not have an advance directive yet? What's the first step they should take?
Well, I'm happy to try to answer your question, Heidi. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good, thank you. So I was privileged to serve on the Advanced Directive Adoption Committee this year because there's a statewide group that just submitted information to the legislature to improve Oregon's Advanced Directive, because we have the dubious honor of having the most difficult advanced directive in the country. Under our statute, Oregon residents are required to use a specific form. So we can't use, for example, other documents such as 5 wishes. We have to use the form designated by Oregon statute. And we're trying to make it more user-friendly and easier to read, because it's right now at a 12th grade level. But you can actually go online and download the current version of the Advanced Directive form. You don't have to have it notarized. You could fill it out and have 2 of your neighbors witness you sign it. So I think the key thing to do is just to get one and get it filled out with the way that you know that designates what your wishes are, and then just to call up a couple neighbors and say, hey, do you mind coming over? You could do it on the front porch, you could do it outside, you know, they don't have to be closer than 6 feet, you could be socially distanced. They just have to observe that you're signing your advanced directive, or you can take it to a notary if you want to do that. You have the choice of using a notary if you want. So I think the most important thing to do is to think about what your wishes would be. And then if you expect people to follow your wishes, if you're not able to make decisions for yourself, you've got to have them indicated somewhere, and then share that advanced directive with your healthcare provider, and make sure that your any of your family members or your healthcare representatives know about what your wishes are. That's the best thing to do.
Okay.
Thank you. Great question.
And people can just Google Oregon Advanced Directive?
Yes, yes. And you would be led to the actual statute. And then in the statute, it has several pages that you can print off. And hopefully after next year, when the legislature meets in 2021, we will have a simpler, easier to use advanced directive that also has a guidance document that explains it.
Okay, great, thank you. It looks like we have, Sunita?
Yeah, we have a question for Tom. how can prescriptions be filled by multiple caregivers out of county on behalf of the care receiver?
Could you repeat the question again?
Sure. How can prescriptions be filled by multiple caregivers out of county on behalf of the care receiver?
Well, there's nothing that in the laws that would prevent that from happening. Most people, especially as they get elderly, have multiple providers. And those pharmacies, whether they're in county or out of county, can fill prescriptions from multiple providers, and then they would receive them. The caregivers would receive those prescriptions in the normal channels. So it might be a delivery, or the patient's caregivers would pick up those prescriptions at the pharmacy itself. I'm not sure if that answered the question or not.
It sounds like it did.
Okay, well.
If the question asker has another question to maybe, perhaps we can, anyway, just respond through the Q&A, and Tom can get even more precise if that's needed.
Yeah, happy to dig in. I don't see the stream on the chat, so.
Okay.
But it sounds like, yeah.
Yeah. So we have another question. Are there programs that
Sunita, we've lost you temporarily.
So I can ask it. This is Margaret. Are there programs that fund the costs of overnight respite for full-time family caregivers? And what are the parameters for qualifying for that? I think that's probably for Christy. So
Yeah.
are there programs that fund the cost of overnight respite for full-time family caregivers? And what are the parameters for qualifying?
So I think there's probably two programs that the COG offers. One would be Medicaid, and the individual would need to qualify for that. They look at not only financial aspect of Medicaid, but also the individual's kind of activities of daily living, looking at whether they can ambulate or transfer themselves, their elimination, whether they, with bowel or bladder, and then also looking at, are they able to feed themselves? And then cognitive also comes into that component. And so, as I said earlier, if you're interested in applying for Medicaid, anybody can apply at any time. The eligibility worker will go over the qualifications and let them know. And that aspect provides quite a bit of caregiver relief hours in forms of home care worker, or if they reside in a facility. The other program is the Oregon Project Independence. It's much fewer hours, but it's not Medicaid. So a lot of people are hesitant to apply for Medicaid. And so it's another aspect where it could provide some respite for the caregiver for their loved one. So that's two aspects of potentially providing respite relief for your loved one.
So Heidi, Sunita's internet is going in and out, so I'm going to ask more questions if I can. Would that be okay?
Yes, that's terrific.
Yeah, and I have one actually for you, and that is you've done a lot of research and looking into avenues of optimal aging. And are there some key points that you'd want to share with our participants to think about in terms of what we call optimal aging, what that is, and kind of some key issues?
I think we all personally, that's a great question. I think we all have something in mind about how we all want to grow older. And there are the pharmacological, I think, we worry about physical disability, we worry about cognitive disabilities, reduction in function. And what's interesting about it all is that it comes down to some very basic things that I think a number of our speakers have spoken about. One is social contacts, socialization. Loneliness is one of the most difficult things and can lead to physical problems as well. So social contacts, exercise, and it can be, as one of our speakers last year talked about, it can be non-exercise. What is it called? Non-exercise activity. There's a little mnemonic, and I can't think of it right now. But basically, it is any movement. Movement, walking from your car to the grocery store. Any kind of movement is good movement. I think in general, Margaret, you can add to this too. What we really are looking for is very basic things that keep us engaged. Purpose in life, meaning in life can be a number of things, very personalized, very individualized. It can be rescuing cats, as Christy does, right? Or walking your basset hound on a leash, or just engaging with neighbors. It can be really anything that has always given you, and a lot of times it's continuity, right? What you've always done, you do in some fashion, maybe altered, but some fashion. So, Margaret, what other thoughts do you have about aging well?
Well, I'm a bit biased since I'm a family gerontologist, but I always go back to those family and relational ties and the importance of intimacy. It doesn't mean that you need to have an intimate partner like a spouse or someone, a romantic partner. It just means that the quality of our social ties are just critical. And there is research out there, as alluded to earlier, that suggests that people who are lonely have much higher risks of death, and certainly it impinges on our quality of life. So that I always emphasize the importance of those relationships. And there are practitioners out there that can help us if we have some problematic relationships within our families. If the parties are willing to talk through stuff, I think it's important. And certainly with aging families, when you've got an adult child who's aging, my next door neighbor is 88, his son is 70. So we've got, this caregiving situation going on, and they have to negotiate and renegotiate their relationships. So those relationships are just really critical. That leads me actually to, let me just finish, Tom. The question that you had mentioned, answered earlier, the participant says, thank you. The concern by my aging grandmother that her children won't be able to fill her medications while she's spending time with her children that live out of the county. It sounds like that is not a need for her to be concerned with. There's additional forms to be filled out for those prescriptions to be filled, is the question.
Yes, those would be internal HIPAA forms. Each pharmacy has their own HIPAA forms, privacy forms. And so the family member would go into the pharmacy of choice, get a form, might be online too, but then they would take that back and fill it out and have the grandmother sign the form saying that these are the people that are eligible to speak on my behalf, pick up my prescriptions, talk with pharmacists, and so on and so forth. And then the family member brings that form into the pharmacy and everything should be fine. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna keep asking questions because I know what people, Heidi, you too, because I know there's things that we know from the evaluations. Barb Hansen was a very good speaker last year. And one of the things that I am curious about, Barb, as we think about quality of life at the end of life, what are like the top things that we should be thinking about as a family regarding the quality of life during that end of life period?
Sure. Thank you, Margaret. So Heidi's question earlier actually lends itself to this subject because I think it is important for all of us to indicate our wishes. If you've ever been in the position of having to make healthcare decisions for a family member, or friend who's no longer able to make those decisions for themselves, it's really challenging if you don't really know what that person would want. So, you know, having advanced directive forms filled out, having a POLST form filled out if you have a serious health condition. At any age, if you have a serious health condition, you should consider having a POLST form filled out, and you would talk with your primary care provider about that, because the POLST form is actually medical orders that can be implemented by a hospital, an emergency room. And in Oregon, we have the luxury, and not every state has this. In Oregon, we have the luxury of having a POLST registry. So, you know, if you were someone who lived alone and your neighbor saw you because you'd collapsed while you were out gardening in your front yard, if they called 911, the 911 service, the EMS response folks would be able to contact the registry to find out, and they're open 24 hours a day, to find out if you have a POLST form that you have completed and your physician or nurse practitioner has signed. And then they would know what you want. So by the time you arrived in the emergency room, they would know whether you wanted to be resuscitated, whether you wanted to be put on a ventilator. All of those things are important. Again, POLST forms are really for people who have a serious illness and there's a chance that they might be taken to the hospital. But otherwise, it's just to go have somebody designated to be your healthcare representative to be able to make decisions for you. So another example I can use from the hospice world is in the olden days, probably 30 years ago, hospices were reluctant to admit people who to hospice who lived alone because they felt like, well, who is going to take care of them? You know, we don't know what the plans will be, but nowadays hospices will admit people who live alone. You just have to have some sort of a plan if you're not able to care for yourself, you know, up until the day you die, that you would agree to go into a foster home or have a family caregiver come in or hire a caregiver or have some sort of arrangement. And if you don't mind, I'd love to segue to a question I have for Christy, because it just is a real life example that came from yesterday. Some friends called me. We have a mutual friend who's in her early 90s, and she happens to live in a senior living facility, but it's independent living, and she's gone on hospice, and she really is getting to the point where she can't take care of herself. So they wanted to know what some resources were. So I told them about the ADRC and how they could, you know, apply to get an in-home caregiver. But I have a question for you, Christy, because they asked me, how long does it take by the time you apply to try to find an in-home caregiver? And is that really better than, you know, putting something out on Craigslist and taking your chances with someone who might respond to a Craigslist ad?
That's a great question. So I'm not sure of the turnaround times for the Medicaid application or Oregon Project Independence to get a caregiver. Gosh, and then just thinking of kind of putting it out there on Craigslist. There is care.com as well as a resource. If it's
okay.
You know, they do have senior care there. If she's in an independent living facility, asking, you know, there may be other caregivers that are being brought in to serve other residents there, or if the facility itself has, you know, referrals or names of people who have worked as private caregivers, just knowing the time frame that might be needed for your friend. Those are kind of some resources there. Yeah, and then just, you know, if you do hire a caregiver, making sure they're licensed and they've been background checked, and, you know, all those things just to make sure that your loved one is cared for. So, yeah. Well,
Christy, I don't know if you encounter this situation much, but I know hospices encounter it. Patients themselves with resources and family members are reluctant to spend money. If in other words, if they have adequate resources and they don't qualify for Medicaid, but they're still reluctant to spend money. And one of the concerns I hear is, well, we want to make sure that mom has enough money to pay for her, assisted living facility or independent living facility for the next year or two. Whereas I know by the time someone goes on hospice, 25% of hospice patients are on for a week or less, and about 50% are on for a month or less. And in the state of Oregon, the median length of stay for hospice is about 24 days. So it's kind of gently nudging family members to, and patients themselves sometimes, to think about, we need to make sure that the care needs are taken care of now and not save resources for a year from now when they might not be needed.
That's so true. I had that experience with my own grandmother, and it was, taking care of her resources now. What are her needs now that I can help her now, and we'll worry about later on, which we never got to. But you're so right, Barb. I mean, I will give a little plug for the program that I work with, which is Senior Corps. We have senior companions, and they are volunteers who are background checked and go through 20 hours of pre-service training, and they provide, they can provide respite, they can provide companionship or transportation for older adults. And so that's something they do. It's at no cost to the senior, but to get referred to that program would be going through the Aging and Disability Resource Connection as well. But we do have seniors that we serve in all 3 counties, and just try and help them live independently in their homes for as long as they can. So.
Very good. I have a question. Actually, this goes to you, Christy. When I'd like you to speak a little bit to at least something that I was made aware of about splitting resources when you have a husband and wife, let's say, who one person is very much on sort of the downward and a rapid spend cycle, right, of either a foster home or some nursing care or something like that. And it was our situation, and I was told that there's a procedure to go through in which you officially split the resources of the couple so that you can document the point of like spend down, so that you essentially don't financially devastate the other individual too. Does that sound familiar?
It sounds familiar. Unfortunately, I am not specialized in that to be able to answer that question. But I will say that when someone does go through the Medicaid application process, the case managers they work with, they do educate them on that process if there are financial concerns, so they know what would be, applicable to each applicant. And so they fully understand before they are essentially enrolled in Medicaid, so that they would know what those financial implications are, and if there's a couple, and what that would involve.
Christy, this is Margaret. Where would do you have a suggestion for where Heidi's question could be referred? Like, where within your organization do you think that question could be posed for more information?
I could probably take that question to Randy Moore and see who she would recommend to answer that question for us.
Right.
I put anyone's name out there, and I'm not sure if the ADRC would be an appropriate place for that question either. So I'm definitely more than happy to pose that question to her and see. Yeah.
Okay. And if you're willing, you could maybe communicate directly with Heidi.
It's a historic question because my father died, I think it's now 12 years ago. But at the time, that was a big concern because he had such expensive care needs. And although they had resources, they didn't have infinite resources. And it was unclear what his path would be, and unclear about anyway, it was just really sort of a way of trying to look at a crystal ball and try and make some sense of what the future might look like. But also a big concern was that the spend down would devastate them entirely. And I think it was an individual at the Office on Aging who mentioned this particular approach where there is some official dividing of resources at a certain point. So anyway, I just thought I'd mention that because it was news to me, but it was, of course, 12 years ago. Things change.
I will see if I can get a resource for that question.
Okay, great, thank you. I have a question for Barb about the registry. Do you have to do that? How does that happen? Because we have a pulse from my mother, but I don't think it's registered anywhere other than with her doctor.
Typically, physicians' offices, home health or hospice programs, whoever assists to get the pulse form completed, then sends it electronically. It could be faxed, it could be snail mailed, but typically it goes electronically to the pulse registry, and they have been getting them into the registry within like 24 hours. It's just amazing how quickly it is. So you could check with the doctor's office to make sure that the pulsed information is in the registry, because again, it doesn't do any good to have a pulse form if the EMS folks and the emergency room folks can't access it. And again, we're so lucky in Oregon that we have a pulse registry because many other states do not. And so, you know, it's still useful to keep the pulse on the refrigerator. I know, especially when the pulse form first came out and it was a pink document, it was kept on the refrigerator. But not everybody wants to have their personal health preferences on their refrigerator or to be reminded. So really the best thing is to have it in the registry. So that's all I would do, is just double check with the doctor's office.
Yeah, a follow-up on that is a question I have from a panelist who can't pose in the Q&A for Barb. And that is that, how do you advise families of parents who refuse to fill in the pulse or talk about end-of-life issues because it is not appropriate to ask and would offend their elders? Do you have any comments on that at all?
Yeah, I think, of course, that's a difficult conversation to have, and there are some great resources online that give you suggested scripts and phrases to use. I'm thinking of the Conversation Project as one. But I think just to sit down and say, you know, Mom or Dad, I just want to make sure that if you're not able to decide things for yourself, that we follow your wishes. And it's really important to us to follow your wishes and to see if that allows a doorway to be open, because nobody really wants to talk about these things. We're very much a death-denying society, and we don't want to think that we're not going to be capable of making our own decisions right up until the end. But I think if you frame it that, you know, let's just get this done, let's talk about it today, let's, you know, talk about it with your primary care provider, and let's make sure that we get everything documented so that your wishes are followed when the time comes. And hopefully we won't need to, you know, address these or need these decisions for, you know, years, but, you know, let's just get it done. And it goes back to alleviating that worry. You know, our earlier speaker talked about, you know, how to allay your concerns. And this is just one of those important things that you want to get checked off your list and just make sure you've got it covered, and then you can put it away. You don't have to put it on the refrigerator. So I mean, that's my suggestion, Margaret. Probably you and Heidi have other suggestions for folks.
You know, the only thing that worked in my case was to say, this would be a gift to me. Mm-hmm. If you, you know, so because most older adults or people, parents, have two abiding wishes, right? They want to make sure that things are taken care of in terms of their resources if they have any and such. And the other is they want all the relationships in their family to be good, right? And that's kind of a to make sure it happens, right? But that's the wish. And so I approached it with, Mom, I really need this information. It would be such a gift to me. You would be helping me out so much. It would really my worry and anxiety. Can you please help me here? And my mother came forward, and she wasn't willing to before that. So that was one strategy I had, but I don't know if that would work for everybody.
Well, I think that kind of appeal with a little bit of, with a touch of guilt. I think that always works.
I used your suggestion of this gift idea from last year's Aging Summit, and that's what I asked for my parents for Christmas last year.
Really?
And it worked.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah, it worked. So thank you.
Yeah, I do have one other panelist question for you, Tom. And I don't want this putting you on the spot, but this is from one of the biggest issues for us as we age is the fear of falling. And I didn't know if from a pharmaceutical perspective, if there's any things that you could talk about regarding that.
Oh, yeah. There's a list called the Beers list, and it's a list of medications that we have to be cautious in the elderly with that can cause all sorts of situations where low blood pressure is one example, where, you know, the beta blockers, for instance, people get up in the night and they fall. Dr. Goldner is the expert on the sleeping medications, the benzodiazepines especially, can do that. That's one of the big reasons, besides the dementia, is why we're trying to limit benzodiazepines in the elderly if we can. There's a whole slew of medications that can increase the risk of fall. Anything that depresses the central nervous system, makes us groggy, makes us sleepy, slows our motor skills, and there's the list is quite extensive, but those are two of the big ones. Of course, alcohol, mixing pain medications with other like muscle relaxants is a real bad combo. If you like, I can provide a link to some good information about not only the risk of fall, but the relative risk of fall. Because, you know, there's many things out there that can increase our risk of fall, and some are much greater than others, and especially if they're given together. So, you know, last thing you want mom to do is to have a martini and a muscle relaxer and some Vicodin, because it's probably going to be a face plant pretty soon.
Yeah.
So I will somehow, I guess we'll, at the end of this, provide links for people.
Yeah, I know that there's been some links in the chat, in our chat, but I'm going to make a plug for Rice's, because there's also, you're there, you know, your there, and so there might be a way for you to connect with individuals too that are really interested in that as well.
Yeah.
So that would be great.
To help out.
Yeah, so thank you, because I knew that there were some issues there. There is another question in the box here from a participant. She says that she's had an opposite situation. This is regarding the thing we talked about with you, Barb, about the question in family members. She writes, I'm 70 and my daughter is 33. Anytime I bring up the subject of my end of life issues, she shuts the conversation. How can I frame the subject so receptive? And this is going to be.
Well, I really suggest using your strategy, Margaret. Maybe she says, this would be a gift to me to be able to get this done, you know, and approach it that way, and just say, again, this would just cross this off my list. We get it done. Hopefully we won't, you know, need to use this information for another 20 years. But it would just be a wonderful gift if we could get this done. Yeah, I do realize that situation. And I know I was guilty of that in the past too. I remember my father approaching me and wanting to talk about his will, and I didn't want to talk about it at that time. So yeah, I've been in that position.
Yeah.
But I think the gift strategy is a good one.
Yeah, or writing it in a letter. That might be a good place to start. So I've loved this. I wish we had more time, but we are out of time. So I want to thank all of you, Heidi and Barb and Tom and Christy, for joining us. We have lots more topics to cover next year in our Aging Summit, and I want to thank all of our participants for being here. I appreciate the generosity of our participants overall. We've met the donation goal. We've raised $1,103, so thank you very much. More importantly, it's not about the money in terms of how I feel. It's more about getting this information out. So I appreciate everyone hanging in there for this marathon, and I'm going to call, unless there's anybody wants to raise anything right away. That's about it, I guess. So I'm going to be calling this summit to a close, and we made it, folks. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret.
All right. Have a great day, everybody. Stay safe.
Thank you.